What if everything you thought you knew about human history was incomplete? Right now, beneath your feet, scattered across every continent on Earth, lie remnants of a story that challenges our entire understanding of civilization itself. These aren't random artifacts or misplaced stones. They're breadcrumbs leading to something extraordinary, something that existed long before our textbooks claim advanced societies were even possible. Welcome to Just About Earth, where we explore the questions that linger just beyond the edges of accepted knowledge. Tonight we're diving into evidence that suggests an advanced civilization flourished thousands of years before we believed such sophistication could exist. And the most unsettling part? We might be living among their achievements right now, walking past their creations every single day, completely unaware of their true origins. The stars above you tonight have witnessed something remarkable. They've observed the rise and fall of countless societies, many of which never made it into our history books. While you're settling in for this exploration, consider that the same celestial patterns illuminating your evening once guided builders, whose techniques we still can't replicate today. These ancient observers understood something we've forgotten, and their knowledge might be hiding in plain sight. Your curiosity brought you here, and that same drive to understand our past connects you to every human who ever looked up at the night sky and wondered about their place in the grand story of existence. If you're ready to question everything you thought you knew about human development, I hope you'll join our community by subscribing. Together we examine the mysteries that mainstream archaeology often overlooks. Traditional historical narratives paint human progress as a steady climb from primitive to sophisticated. We imagine our ancestors gradually developing tools, language, agriculture, and architecture in neat, predictable stages. But what if this linear progression is nothing more than a comfortable illusion? What if advanced knowledge appeared much earlier than we've been taught, created by people whose names have been erased from memory? Consider the archaeological anomalies that dot our planet. Massive stone blocks, some weighing hundreds of tons, fitted together with precision that modern engineers struggle to achieve. These aren't isolated incidents occurring in just one location. From the mountains of Peru to the deserts of Egypt, from Easter Island to the forests of Lebanon, we find similar construction techniques that supposedly emerged independently across vast distances and time periods. The conventional explanation suggests that different cultures coincidentally developed identical advanced methods. But there's another possibility, one that requires us to reconsider our assumptions about ancient capabilities. Perhaps these techniques originated from a single source, a civilization that possessed knowledge far beyond what we attribute to their era. Megalithic foundations supporting later constructions tell a fascinating story. Archaeologists consistently discover that the oldest layers of famous sites demonstrate superior craftsmanship compared to everything built afterward. The base stones are larger, more precisely cut, and assembled with techniques that later builders apparently couldn't match. It's as if someone with advanced knowledge established these foundations, and subsequent cultures simply built upon their work, unable to replicate the original mastery. This pattern repeats across continents. Ancient sites show clear evidence of multiple construction phases, with the earliest phases displaying the most sophisticated engineering. The logical conclusion: someone came before, someone with capabilities that surpass our current understanding of ancient technological development. Before writing systems preserved information permanently, knowledge survived only through oral tradition. Stories passed from generation to generation inevitably changed, with crucial details fading or transforming over time. Within just a few centuries, historical events could morph into myths, and real people could become legendary figures. The actual achievements of an advanced ancient civilization might now exist only as fantastical tales of gods and heroes performing impossible feats. Archaeological evidence faces significant limitations. Organic materials decompose, leaving behind only stone and metal artifacts. If an advanced civilization primarily used materials that don't survive millennia, their existence might be nearly invisible to modern researchers. Wood, leather, textiles, and even certain metals can vanish completely, taking with them proof of sophisticated societies. Climate and geography further complicate discovery. Coastal cities might lie beneath hundreds of feet of ocean water, victims of rising sea levels since the last ice age. Forest civilizations could have returned to nature, their wooden structures consumed by time and vegetation. desert societies might rest under centuries of sand accumulation. We're essentially examining a puzzle with most pieces missing, trying to reconstruct the complete image from scattered fragments. When archaeologists encounter artifacts that seem too advanced for their supposed age, they face difficult decisions. Dating methods might be questioned, contexts might be re-examined, or the objects might be set aside as anomalies. However, each anomaly represents a real event, created by real people using real knowledge. Perhaps these outliers aren't mistakes in our understanding, but glimpses of a forgotten chapter in human development. This hypothetical civilization might not have resembled the empires we study today. Instead of massive centralized kingdoms, they could have operated as networks of connected communities, sharing knowledge across vast distances without political unification. Their expertise might have focused on practical sciences, navigation, astronomy, agriculture, metallurgy, and engineering. Rather than conquering territories, they might have spread their innovations through trade, collaboration, and teaching. Such a model would explain how similar advanced techniques appeared simultaneously in distant locations. It would account for the sophisticated foundations underlying later construction projects. Most importantly, it would provide context for the technological anomalies that don't fit our current historical timeline. The evidence exists, scattered across our planet like pieces of an enormous puzzle. Ancient maps showing land bases that weren't supposed to be known, astronomical alignments and structures built by cultures we assumed lacked advanced mathematical knowledge, construction techniques that modern technology struggles to duplicate. Each clue points toward the same possibility. We're not the first advanced civilization this planet has hosted. Tonight, as we examine this evidence together, remember that history isn't just about the past. Understanding our true origins changes how we see our present capabilities and future potential. The knowledge these ancient builders possessed didn't vanish completely. Traces of their wisdom might still influence our world today, waiting for us to recognize their significance and reclaim what we've forgotten. The most profound transformations in human history often happen without fanfare or recognition. Consider how an ancient breakthrough in agriculture might have traveled from community to community, each group adapting and improving the technique until its origins became completely obscured. Seeds carefully selected and cultivated by forgotten farmers could form the genetic foundation of crops feeding billions today. Stone-cutting methods that seem to emerge spontaneously in distant civilizations might trace back to master craftsmen whose names dissolved into time centuries earlier. Knowledge doesn't require attribution to persist. Revolutionary astronomical calculations can survive embedded within religious ceremonies, disguised as spiritual practices when their scientific origins are forgotten. Navigation techniques might continue as cultural traditions long after people stop understanding the mathematical principles behind them. Construction methods can be passed down through apprenticeships that span generations, with each builder adding refinements while losing sight of the original innovators who developed the core techniques. This phenomenon multiplies across millennia. Every tool you use, every method you take for granted, represents the accumulated wisdom of countless individuals whose contributions have been absorbed into the collective human experience. When you multiply this process across thousands of years, entire civilizations can vanish from collective memory, while their innovations remain woven into the fabric of daily life. Our planet holds vast territories that remain essentially unexplored. Sophisticated underwater archaeology has mapped less than 20% of the ocean floor, leaving enormous areas where coastal cities from previous eras might rest undisturbed. Satellite imagery struggles to penetrate dense forest canopies that could conceal significant archaeological sites. Desert environments continuously shift, burying and revealing structures in cycles that span centuries. Even regions we consider thoroughly documented continue yielding surprises. Construction projects regularly uncover unexpected archaeological layers just beneath modern surfaces. Drought conditions expose previously submerged ruins in lakes and reservoirs. Erosion reveals carved stones that were hidden for generations. Each discovery serves as a reminder that our understanding of human settlement patterns remains incomplete. Recognition presents another challenge entirely. Without proper context, sophisticated ancient structures can appear indistinguishable from natural rock formations. Precisely carved stones might be dismissed as geological coincidences by casual observers. Artifacts that don't match expected timelines often get categorized as anomalies and relegated to storage rather than studied intensively. The framework we use to interpret discoveries can sometimes prevent us from recognizing their true significance. Settlement patterns add another layer of complexity to this puzzle. Mobile societies that prioritized adaptability over permanent construction might have left minimal archaeological footprints despite possessing advanced knowledge. Groups that integrated seamlessly with existing cultures could have transmitted their expertise without maintaining distinct architectural styles. Communities that favored biodegradable materials might have created sophisticated technologies that returned to nature, leaving behind only occasional fragments preserved by unusual circumstances. This perspective fundamentally alters our understanding of human progress. Rather than viewing technological development as a consistent upward trajectory, we must consider the possibility of cycles involving both advancement and decline. Historical records document numerous instances where crucial knowledge disappeared when transmission chains were broken. Specialized skills can vanish within a single generation if practitioners don't successfully train successors. If an advanced civilization reached significant heights thousands of years ago before experiencing decline, subsequent societies might have gradually rediscovered portions of that knowledge without realizing they were reconstructing rather than innovating. This scenario would explain technological achievements that appear surprisingly early in the archaeological record, as well as the apparent independent development of similar techniques across widely separated regions. Recognizing this possibility transforms how we perceive our immediate environment. That gently curving road you travel daily might follow a route originally surveyed by engineers whose civilization predates recorded history. Agricultural practices in your region could incorporate principles developed by farmers whose techniques spread across continents through networks we've forgotten. Architectural elements in local buildings might echo design solutions first implemented by builders whose names never appeared in any historical document. Once you begin examining the world through this lens, patterns become increasingly difficult to ignore. Identical symbols appear carved into stone separated by thousands of kilometers, with no documented contact between the cultures that created them. Specific construction techniques emerge simultaneously in regions isolated by vast oceans. Sophisticated mathematical concepts show up embedded in monuments built by societies we assumed lacked advanced mathematical understanding. Storytelling traditions reveal particularly intriguing connections. Mythological narratives from completely separate cultures often share remarkably similar structural elements, character archetypes, and plot developments. While human psychology might naturally generate certain universal themes, some correspondences seem too precise to attribute entirely to coincidence. When these parallels appear alongside archaeological evidence of advanced ancient capabilities, they suggest possible historical connections that predate our current understanding of cultural exchange. The preservation of historical memory through oral tradition follows predictable patterns of transformation. Details that once served practical purposes gradually acquire mystical explanations as their original contexts are forgotten. Skilled leaders become legendary figures with supernatural abilities. Engineering achievements get attributed to divine intervention rather than human expertise. Navigation knowledge becomes associated with magical powers rather than mathematical precision. However, beneath these mythological embellishments, practical information often survives surprisingly intact. Astronomical observations embedded in ceremonial calendars maintain their accuracy across centuries. Agricultural timing preserved in religious festivals continues reflecting optimal planting and harvesting schedules. Construction principles disguised as spiritual practices still produce structurally sound buildings. These practical elements represent the most valuable archaeological evidence for advanced ancient knowledge. Unlike fantastic elements that clearly belong to mythological storytelling, practical information suggests real expertise that was once common enough to be transmitted through oral tradition. When such knowledge appears more sophisticated than expected for its supposed historical period, it provides compelling evidence for earlier civilizations whose achievements were absorbed and transmitted by successor cultures. Researchers dedicated to extracting historical truth from mythological sources have developed sophisticated analytical methods. They examine geographical details embedded in stories, searching for descriptions that match real locations. They analyze technological references within narratives, looking for evidence of practical knowledge that storytellers might not have possessed independently. They compare similar stories from different cultures, mapping potential transmission routes and identifying common source materials. This work reveals that mythology often preserves fragments of genuine historical information in forms specifically designed for memorization and transmission. Epic poems that seemed purely fictional might contain accurate geographical descriptions of regions that were supposedly unknown to their creators. Religious ceremonies that appear entirely symbolic might incorporate precise astronomical calculations. Cultural practices that seem arbitrary might reflect sophisticated understanding of environmental cycles. The implications extend far beyond academic archaeology. If advanced civilizations have risen and fallen before our recorded history began, then human potential might be greater than we currently recognize. Technologies we consider recent innovations might actually represent rediscoveries of ancient knowledge. Problems we're struggling to solve today might have been solved before, with solutions waiting to be uncovered in the remnants of forgotten wisdom. Researchers dedicated to uncovering historical truth beneath layers of mythology have developed fascinating methods for comparing narratives across cultures. When they discover flood stories appearing in civilizations separated by vast oceans, the initial response might be dismissal based on the universal nature of flooding. However, when specific details align with startling precision, identical timeframes, similar survival methods, matching geographical descriptions, coincidence becomes increasingly unlikely. These comparative studies reveal intriguing patterns extending beyond flood narratives. Stories describing mysterious visitors who arrive from distant lands, share revolutionary knowledge, then vanish completely appear with remarkable consistency across unconnected cultures. Sometimes these figures are portrayed as divine beings, other times as wise travelers, occasionally as nameless strangers distinguished only by their advanced understanding. While pure imagination could explain individual stories, the widespread occurrence of nearly identical themes suggests possible historical foundations. The interpretation of these recurring narratives presents compelling possibilities. Rather than mythological inventions, they might preserve distant memories of contact with groups possessing knowledge that seemed impossibly advanced to their contemporaries. Civilizations with sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, or engineering could have appeared godlike to societies still developing these capabilities. Their teachings would be remembered and retold, gradually acquiring mythological elements while preserving core practical information. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation through the global distribution of identical symbols appearing in locations with no documented historical connections. Spiral motifs, for instance, manifest in ancient Irish stone carvings, American Southwest petroglyphs, and Pacific Island artwork with striking consistency. While spiral forms occur naturally throughout the environment, in shells, whirlpools, and galactic formations, their precise artistic execution across isolated cultures suggests possible common origins. These symbolic correspondences extend beyond simple geometric forms. Complex astronomical symbols, architectural proportions, and decorative patterns show up repeatedly in geographically separated civilizations. The mathematical relationships governing these designs often demonstrate sophisticated understanding that supposedly didn't exist in the cultures that created them. This knowledge gap points toward possible transmission from more advanced sources whose contributions have been forgotten. Linguistic analysis reveals equally intriguing connections. Single words appearing in completely unrelated language, families sometimes share identical meanings and similar pronunciations, despite thousands of kilometers separating their speakers. While known trade routes and migration patterns explain some linguistic borrowing, many correspondences lack clear transmission mechanisms. If a technologically advanced civilization traveled extensively, teaching and trading across vast distances, linguistic fragments from their interactions could persist in local vocabularies long after their civilization disappeared. These linguistic remnants might be hiding throughout modern languages, disguised as common words whose true origins remain unrecognized. This etymology often traces word development back several thousand years before encountering inexplicable gaps where origins become untraceable. Some of these linguistic mysteries might represent vocabulary inherited from contact with civilizations that predate recorded history, their original meanings preserved even as their sources were forgotten. Ancient site planning provides another category of compelling evidence. Numerous archaeological locations demonstrate astronomical alignments of extraordinary precision, with structures oriented to track solar, lunar, and stellar movements with accuracy that challenges modern engineering capabilities. The mathematical knowledge required for these calculations supposedly didn't exist when these sites were constructed, yet the alignments function perfectly across millennia. Sometimes researchers discover ingenious low-technology methods that explain how ancient builders achieved remarkable precision using available tools. However, many cases remain unexplained, with accuracy levels that seem to require knowledge and techniques beyond the documented capabilities of their creators. These situations naturally raise questions about knowledge transmission from more advanced sources. The challenge in evaluating this evidence lies in the abundance of conventional explanations for individual anomalies. Unusual artifacts might result from experimental techniques by known cultures exploring new materials. Symbols appearing in distant locations could represent independent inventions of naturally occurring forms. Stories about vanished cities might serve as metaphors for spiritual or political concepts rather than historical accounts. Each piece of evidence, examined individually, admits multiple interpretations that don't require hypothetical lost civilizations. However, the cumulative weight of these anomalies continues growing as new discoveries challenge established timelines and assumptions about ancient capabilities. Archaeological research consistently pushes back dates for human technological achievements, revealing sophisticated developments occurring thousands of years earlier than previously believed. Tools and techniques appear in unexpected locations where they supposedly couldn't exist. Genetic studies demonstrate population movements and cultural contacts that contradict models of ancient isolation. These aren't speculative theories, but documented findings that force continuous revision of historical understanding. Rather than bringing us closer to complete knowledge, each answer generates additional questions about ancient human capabilities and connections. The expanding scope of archaeological discovery reveals how much remains unknown about our past, with each new site potentially rewriting portions of established history. The fate of hypothetical advanced ancient civilizations presents several plausible scenarios. Rather than dramatic disappearance, they might have gradually integrated with later cultures, contributing knowledge while losing distinct identity. Their techniques and wisdom could have been absorbed by successor societies who eventually claimed these innovations as original developments, erasing recognition of their true sources. Natural disasters offer another explanation for cultural discontinuity. Floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, or disease outbreaks could have devastated advanced societies, leaving only scattered survivors unable to maintain previous technological levels. Knowledge that required institutional support or specialized training might have been lost when social structures collapsed, forcing communities to rebuild from reduced foundations. More intriguingly, some groups might have deliberately obscured their historical presence. Perhaps they recognized that their advanced knowledge could be dangerous if misused by less developed societies. Maybe they chose isolation, believing that gradual independent development would be safer than technological transfer. Cultural withdrawal could explain abandoned cities that show no signs of conquest or catastrophe, communities that simply chose to disappear. Historical precedent supports voluntary abandonment as a real phenomenon. Well-documented civilizations have abandoned perfectly functional cities without apparent external pressures, relocating entire populations for reasons that remain mysterious. If advanced ancient civilizations made similar choices, their legacy might consist only of scattered technological remnants and fragmented cultural memories. This perspective fundamentally transforms how we interpret familiar surroundings and cultural inheritance. What appears to be the beginning of civilizational development might actually represent recovery from previous heights. Technological breakthroughs that seem revolutionary might be rediscoveries of knowledge that was once commonplace. Mythological traditions dismissed as entertainment could preserve authentic historical information about real people and events. Every archaeological artifact, linguistic anomaly, and cultural parallel becomes a potential piece of this vast puzzle. Unlike conventional puzzles where all pieces exist in organized sets, historical reconstruction must work with fragmentary evidence scattered across millennia. Most pieces are missing, many are damaged beyond recognition, and the overall pattern remains largely invisible. The challenge resembles attempting to complete a jigsaw puzzle when the box image has faded almost beyond visibility. Faint outlines suggest possible configurations, but insufficient detail remains to confirm the complete picture. Yet those ghostly traces persist, inviting closer examination and raising profound questions about whether our current understanding represents the true scope of human achievement throughout history. Standing before an ancient artifact in a museum, its age almost incomprehensible, or encountering a weathered stone structure in an isolated landscape, a profound question can suddenly crystallize in your mind: who truly came before us? This inquiry extends far beyond our immediate genealogical ancestors to encompass those who might have established the foundations of civilization itself. The builders, farmers, and navigators who shaped human development long before written records began documenting their achievements. Our conventional response draws upon established archaeological narratives. We envision the earliest named civilizations: Mesopotamian city-states, Egyptian dynasties, Indus Valley communities, and ancient Chinese kingdoms. We imagine the first urban walls rising from river plains, initial seafaring vessels departing protected harbors, and primitive metal tools replacing stone implements. However, this familiar chronology represents only the fragments we've successfully reconstructed from surviving evidence, essentially the documented period after documentation itself began. Archaeological discoveries continuously demonstrate that human civilization extends much deeper into the past than our models suggest. Concepts once dismissed as impossible, such as sophisticated monument construction predating Egyptian pyramids by thousands of years, have been validated through systematic excavation. Sites like Göbekli Tepe reveal complex architectural achievements created by societies we previously assumed lacked such capabilities, forcing continuous revision of our developmental timeline. Each chronological expansion reveals widening gaps between theoretical models and actual discoveries. These discrepancies suggest that our understanding remains fundamentally incomplete, with significant chapters of human achievement potentially missing from the historical record entirely. The deeper implication challenges our basic assumptions about civilizational development. Rather than simply pushing back dates for familiar achievements, we must consider whether entire sophisticated societies rose and disappeared before the cultures we currently recognize as foundational. These hypothetical civilizations would have possessed complex organization and advanced capabilities that vanished before anyone thought to preserve their names or stories through writing systems. This possibility becomes less far-fetched when we consider the fragility of even modern infrastructure. Contemporary roads begin deteriorating within years without constant maintenance. Buildings left unoccupied decay significantly within decades. Even our most impressive architectural achievements could collapse into rubble within centuries if abandoned completely. Given sufficient time without human intervention, perhaps a millennium or more, much of our current civilization could vanish entirely, leaving only scattered traces for future archaeologists. Applying this principle to ancient contexts reveals how easily sophisticated societies could disappear from the historical record. Civilizations that built primarily with organic materials in humid climates would leave minimal archaeological signatures. Stone construction might survive longer, but without contextual evidence, ancient structures could be misidentified as belonging to later periods or dismissed as natural formations rather than human creations. We consistently underestimate how thoroughly natural forces can erase human presence. Fire, flooding, seismic activity, volcanic events, and changing sea levels have eliminated entire regional populations throughout history. Coastal settlements now rest beneath hundreds of feet of ocean water due to post-glacial sea level changes. Fertile valleys have transformed into desert wastelands, burying communities under meters of accumulated sand. Climate shifts have rendered previously habitable regions uninhabitable, forcing population abandonment and structural decay. These vanished locations might contain evidence of civilizations that preceded our known historical timeline, their remains inaccessible beneath water, sand, or vegetation, until environmental conditions shift to reveal them again. Recent discoveries of submerged cities and desert archaeological sites demonstrate that significant human settlements exist in currently unreachable locations. Human activity itself represents another major factor in historical erasure. Successive civilizations commonly build directly upon earlier sites, reusing materials and foundations while obliterating evidence of previous occupants. Walking through ancient ruins today, you might be standing above multiple layers of even older construction, with each building phase obscuring evidence of its predecessors. Modern cities exemplify this layered development pattern. London, Rome, and countless other metropolitan centers rest upon centuries of accumulated construction, with Roman foundations supporting medieval buildings that in turn provide bases for modern structures. Archaeological excavation in urban environments routinely discovers evidence of previously unknown settlement layers, each representing different historical periods and cultural groups. This layered development pattern extends throughout human history. What we identify as the earliest phases of known civilizations might actually represent construction on foundations laid by forgotten predecessors. The sophisticated engineering techniques and astronomical knowledge displayed by ancient sites might not represent original innovations but rather inherited wisdom passed down from even earlier sources. Knowledge transmission across generations doesn't require deliberate preservation systems. Skills spread naturally through trade relationships, migration patterns, and cultural contact. Techniques learned from one group can be adapted and refined by others, with the original source forgotten within a few generations. Eventually, inherited knowledge becomes so integrated into cultural practice that communities assume it has always been part of their tradition. This inheritance pattern helps explain technological anomalies that appear throughout the archaeological record, capabilities that seem too advanced for their supposed chronological context. Precision construction techniques, sophisticated navigation methods, and complex astronomical calculations sometimes manifest in cultures that theoretically lacked the necessary background knowledge to develop such expertise independently. When confronted with these temporal anomalies, researchers face several interpretive options. They can attempt to reconcile the evidence with existing chronological models, question the accuracy of dating methods, or set aside anomalous findings as unexplained outliers. However, each anomaly represents real human achievement that occurred at a specific time and place, regardless of how well it fits our current understanding. The most challenging possibility involves reconsidering fundamental assumptions about technological development. Rather than representing original innovations, some ancient achievements might reflect knowledge transmission from predecessors who had already mastered these techniques. Advanced understanding that appears too early in the archaeological record might actually be appropriately timed if we account for earlier civilizations whose contributions have been forgotten. Oral traditions from various cultures provide intriguing hints supporting this interpretation. Stories describing knowledge transmission from mysterious outsiders appear across geographically separated societies with remarkable consistency. These narratives typically involve strangers arriving from distant lands or across oceans, sharing crucial information or techniques, then departing without leaving permanent traces. Cultural descriptions of these knowledge bearers vary significantly. Some are portrayed as divine figures, others as unusual but clearly human teachers. However, the underlying pattern remains consistent. External sources provide advanced knowledge that transforms local capabilities before disappearing from the historical record. When similar stories appear in cultures with no documented contact, they suggest possible common historical foundations rather than independent mythological invention. The gaps in our archaeological record provide ample space for such missing civilizations. Current excavation efforts have explored only a tiny fraction of potential sites worldwide. Dense vegetation can conceal massive stone structures for centuries, as demonstrated by recent discoveries in previously unexplored jungle regions. Desert environments continuously shift, alternately burying and revealing architectural remains. Glacial and sea level changes have locked away or submerged entire settlement areas that were once accessible and habitable. The inaccessible archaeological sites scattered across our planet represent crucial missing pieces in humanity's story. Their existence beneath ocean waters, desert sands, and dense vegetation means our current historical understanding derives from merely a fragment of available evidence. This limitation transforms the question who came before us from idle speculation into a fundamental inquiry with profound implications for understanding our present circumstances. Whoever these earlier people were, their decisions and innovations established foundations that continue shaping our world today. They likely didn't perceive themselves as historically significant. They were simply living their lives, addressing daily challenges, constructing shelters, and raising families. However, their choices regarding settlement locations, agricultural practices, and environmental management created ripple effects that have persisted for millennia. Consider how their agricultural innovations might influence your daily meals. If an ancient civilization successfully domesticated plants that became essential food crops, you could be consuming their genetic legacy every single day without realizing it. Their selective breeding programs, irrigation techniques, and soil management practices might have established agricultural foundations that modern farming still relies upon, though their contributions have been forgotten. Construction techniques present another avenue for lasting influence. Methods developed by forgotten builders could have been observed, copied, and refined by later civilizations who assumed they were creating original innovations. Stone-cutting precision, structural engineering principles, and architectural proportions that appear throughout history might trace back to master craftsmen whose names disappeared long before anyone thought to record them. Astronomical knowledge demonstrates particularly clear transmission pathways. If early civilizations developed sophisticated understanding of celestial movements, seasonal cycles, and navigation techniques, this information would naturally integrate into the cultural practices of successor societies. Complex calculations could be preserved within religious ceremonies or agricultural traditions, maintaining their practical utility while obscuring their mathematical origins. This perspective reveals that influence travels through time in subtle, often unrecognizable ways. Rather than dramatic monuments or written declarations, the most profound impact occurs through quiet knowledge transmission, techniques absorbed into daily practice until they become invisible parts of cultural inheritance. Our contemporary story extends much deeper into the past than conventional chronologies suggest, interweaving with the achievements of people whose fingerprints remain on our world, despite the loss of their identities. Before exploring these connections further, I want to acknowledge something important about our shared journey through these questions. If you're finding value in this patient exploration of mysteries that resist quick resolution, if you appreciate wandering through ideas that extend beyond conventional historical boundaries, your engagement makes these conversations possible and meaningful. Subscribing or sharing your thoughts isn't just about numbers or metrics. It's about expanding the community of minds wrestling with these same fascinating uncertainties. The more perspectives we bring together, the richer our collective understanding becomes. Sometimes a casual observation from someone living near an archaeological site provides insights that never appear in academic publications. Other times, a comment from halfway around the world shifts how we interpret evidence we thought we understood. There's profound comfort in knowing that others share this curiosity, even though we're scattered across different time zones and circumstances. Right now, someone might be listening from a bustling urban apartment with city sounds flowing through their windows. Someone else could be in a quiet rural location, where evening stillness allows them to hear insects chirping outside. Another person might be starting their morning with coffee on the opposite side of the globe while you're preparing for sleep. This geographic dispersion mirrors the ripple effects we've been discussing. Just as ancient civilizations influenced our present through chains of transmission we can barely trace. Your engagement with these ideas creates similar ripples in the contemporary world. The questions you choose to explore, the conversations you initiate, and the perspectives you share all contribute to how others understand these subjects. Clicking a like button or subscribing might seem like a simple screen interaction, but it represents the first link in a chain of connections you can't fully predict. It's the modern equivalent of joining a campfire conversation that's been continuing for hours, where your arrival and attention become part of the collective memory and ongoing dialogue. This campfire metaphor resonates deeply with how knowledge traveled in earlier eras. Without recordings or written archives, information spread through direct human contact. Participation required physical presence and active listening. By showing up and engaging, you became part of the preservation and transmission process, helping keep ideas alive through memory and retelling. Contemporary engagement follows similar patterns despite our technological tools. When you invest time in conversations like this, you're actively participating in keeping complex ideas alive and accessible. Your presence and attention contribute to the ongoing process of collective exploration and understanding. People join these discussions for various reasons. Some feel drawn by lifelong fascination with historical mysteries. Others appreciate the possibility that our past contains more complexity than mainstream education typically presents. Many simply enjoy the deliberate pace and contemplative approach, finding respite from daily routines in larger questions about human development and cultural inheritance. All motivations fit naturally within this exploration. What becomes particularly interesting is how collective engagement with historical mysteries often transforms our perception of contemporary events. Recognizing that unknown civilizations might have subtly influenced our world helps us notice similar influence patterns operating in the present moment. We begin observing how ideas propagate across cultures, how innovations spread and evolve through adaptation, and how practices originating in small communities can become globally adopted without anyone remembering their sources. This awareness extends beyond historical speculation into practical recognition of ongoing cultural transmission processes. Consider your personal inheritance of knowledge and practices whose origins you've never investigated. Cooking techniques passed down through family generations might trace back through multiple cultural exchanges spanning centuries. Musical preferences could reflect stylistic evolution that crossed numerous geographical and temporal boundaries before reaching your personal playlist. Even unconscious habits might derive from cultural practices transmitted through social networks you're not consciously aware of. Technology exemplifies this layered inheritance pattern. The device enabling your current listening experience represents accumulated contributions from countless innovators, most of whom remain anonymous despite their essential roles in its development. Every component, software algorithm, and manufacturing process reflects collaborative human achievement, extending across multiple generations and cultural contexts. This recognition connects directly to our exploration of forgotten civilizations, opening ourselves to the possibility that our world builds upon foundations laid by people we've forgotten simultaneously, opens us to appreciating unseen contributions occurring throughout our contemporary environment. Historical awareness cultivates appreciation for the complex networks of knowledge transmission that continue operating around us every day. Understanding that influence often travels invisibly through time and space helps us recognize the profound interconnectedness of human experience across all historical periods. Whether we're examining ancient astronomical knowledge preserved in cultural traditions, or observing how modern innovations spread through global communication networks, the fundamental patterns remain remarkably consistent. Ideas, techniques, and cultural practices move through human communities in ways that often obscure their origins while preserving their practical benefits. Recognition of these invisible transmission patterns reveals that our present moment exists not in isolation, but as part of an unbroken chain extending deep into the past. Every action we take today will eventually become foundation material for someone else's future, creating ripple effects we cannot predict or observe directly. This understanding becomes crucial as we examine the possibility of forgotten civilizations, because it helps us comprehend how profound influence can operate across vast timescales without leaving obvious traces. Understanding invisible influence through personal experience makes it easier to imagine similar processes operating thousands of years ago. When you recognize how practices, ideas, and innovations enter your life without clear attribution, you develop appreciation for the complexity of cultural transmission across historical periods. This perspective proves essential for evaluating archaeological evidence that doesn't fit conventional chronological models. Influence operates most powerfully through practical utility rather than dramatic visibility. A tool design that provides superior performance can outlast its inventors by millennia, copied and refined by countless users who never learn its origins. Construction techniques that create more durable structures spread naturally through observation and adaptation, becoming standard practice long after their original developers are forgotten. Stories that inspire behavioral changes continue influencing communities generations after their initial purpose has been lost. Ancient ruins embody this principle perfectly. Standing before weathered stones assembled with impressive precision, we naturally wonder whether their builders intended such longevity or simply solved immediate practical problems using the best methods available. The survival of their work across centuries or millennia might represent accidental preservation rather than deliberate monument building, yet the impact remains identical regardless of original intention. This same uncertainty applies to contemporary actions and ideas. We rarely witness the full consequences of our decisions and contributions, but their absence from our direct observation doesn't diminish their potential significance. Every conversation, innovation, or creative work becomes a seed with unpredictable growth patterns, potentially influencing future development in ways we cannot anticipate. These discussions function as cultural seeds, with each participant taking different elements that resonate with their existing knowledge and interests. Some insights get passed along immediately through conversation or sharing. Others remain dormant until future experiences provide context that makes them meaningful. Some get forgotten consciously but continue operating subconsciously, influencing perception and decision-making in subtle ways. The full impact remains invisible to individual participants, but the collective process continues regardless. Your participation connects you to this ongoing transmission network. Whether you recently discovered these conversations or have been engaging for an extended period, you've entered a moment that links you with all previous participants and creates potential connections with future ones. People who encounter these ideas later will inherit something shaped partly by your presence and attention, even if you never interact directly. This connection pattern mirrors our relationship with hypothetical ancient civilizations. We don't know their identities or specific contributions, yet we inhabit a world they helped shape through their decisions and innovations. Their names vanished from historical memory, but we continue encountering the results of their problem-solving efforts and cultural developments. Similarly, your engagement creates shared intellectual space with other participants across geographical and temporal boundaries. Adding your voice to this community through subscription or active participation represents the smallest possible contribution to a much larger ongoing conversation. Once you've made that connection, we can focus completely on examining the evidence, patterns, and mysteries that might reveal whether advanced ancient civilizations actually existed and influenced our development. Archaeological investigation confronts us with uncomfortable truths about historical knowledge. Rather than the organized archive we imagine, the record resembles a damaged puzzle with most pieces missing, many fragments scattered randomly, and numerous elements too deteriorated to interpret clearly. The historical narratives we construct represent tentative assemblies of available fragments, always incomplete and subject to revision when new evidence emerges. This fragmentary nature creates characteristic gaps and shadows throughout our understanding of the past. Events clearly occurred without leaving sufficient evidence to explain their mechanisms or significance. Contradictory discoveries suggest different interpretations of the same historical periods. Most challenging are the absences, places where something obviously happened but no surviving traces remain to document the details. These absences follow recognizable patterns that reveal the limitations of current archaeological knowledge. Geographic patterns show entire regions remain essentially unexplored due to accessibility challenges, political instability, or resource constraints. Vast ocean floor areas have never been systematically mapped despite technological capabilities. Dense rainforests conceal structures that satellite imagery cannot penetrate effectively. Desert environments continue burying and revealing archaeological sites in cycles that span decades or centuries. Mountainous valleys and remote island chains might contain settlement evidence that no research expeditions have documented. In these unexamined territories, the possibility always exists of discoveries that would fundamentally alter our understanding of human development and cultural achievement. Each unexplored region represents potential evidence for civilizations we haven't recognized yet. Chronological patterns present equally significant limitations. Certain historical periods show dramatically reduced evidence despite no apparent reasons for reduced human activity. Scattered artifacts, isolated tools, pottery fragments, or construction remnants suggest active populations without providing sufficient context to understand their social organization, technological capabilities, or cultural practices. These temporal gaps might conceal sophisticated societies whose material culture didn't survive preservation conditions or hasn't been discovered yet. Archaeological anomalies pose the most direct challenges to established chronological models. Objects appearing in geological layers that predate their supposed development create interpretative difficulties. Architectural techniques manifesting earlier than theoretical timelines predict require explanation. Technologies discovered in locations where they theoretically couldn't exist force reconsideration of cultural contact and transmission patterns. These anomalous finds receive the designation out-of-place artifacts in archaeological literature. While many admit reasonable explanations, dating errors, geological disturbance, moving materials between layers, or misinterpretation of evidence, some consistently resist integration into accepted historical frameworks. The most problematic cases suggest either serious flaws in our chronological understanding or the existence of capabilities and knowledge that predate our current models. Conservative archaeological practice typically sets aside anomalous evidence until supporting discoveries provide clearer context. This cautious approach prevents premature theoretical revisions based on isolated finds, but also risks overlooking patterns that might become apparent only when multiple anomalies are considered collectively. Each unexplained artifact represents real human activity that occurred at specific times and places, regardless of how well it fits existing theoretical frameworks. The accumulation of anomalous evidence creates tension between maintaining established chronologies and remaining open to new possibilities. When numerous discoveries challenge the same theoretical assumptions, the possibility emerges that our fundamental models require significant revision rather than minor adjustments. This situation might apply particularly to questions about advanced ancient civilizations whose achievements don't match our expectations for their historical periods. Understanding these limitations helps frame our investigation of possible forgotten civilizations. Rather than expecting definitive proof, we must work with fragmentary evidence, geographic gaps, and chronological anomalies to build tentative interpretations that acknowledge both the possibilities and uncertainties inherent in archaeological reconstruction. Single anomalous discoveries maintain reasonable doubt about their significance, allowing established chronologies to remain largely intact. However, when multiple unexplained findings begin forming coherent patterns across different locations and time periods, they transcend the status of mere curiosities and suggest systematic gaps in our historical understanding. This transformation from isolated oddities to meaningful patterns represents a crucial threshold in archaeological interpretation. Historical precedent demonstrates this pattern recognition process repeatedly. Sites initially dismissed or misdated have subsequently revealed chronologies thousands of years older than originally believed. Tools exhibiting sophisticated craftsmanship have been discovered in contexts that predate supposed technological development by significant margins. Human remains have been found in geographical regions where established migration models indicated no early human presence was possible. Each confirmed revision follows predictable stages. Initial surprise at findings that contradict established models gives way to careful re-evaluation of dating methods, contextual evidence, and theoretical assumptions. Eventually, new discoveries become integrated into revised historical narratives that accommodate previously anomalous evidence. However, between initial discovery and final acceptance lies a crucial intermediate period that receives less attention in popular discussions of archaeological progress. During this liminal phase, discoveries exist in interpretative uncertainty while researchers debate their significance and implications. Some specialists immediately recognize the potential importance of anomalous findings, while others dismiss them as measurement errors, contamination, or misinterpretation. Within this contested space, speculation naturally flourishes about possible explanations that conventional models cannot easily accommodate. The concept of unknown advanced civilizations often emerges during these periods of interpretive uncertainty. When clusters of sophisticated techniques or unusual artifacts appear earlier than theoretical timelines predict, one potential explanation involves sources of knowledge and capability that haven't been identified yet. These hypothetical sources might have possessed technological understanding that exceeds our current assumptions about ancient human development. This speculative framework becomes particularly relevant when considering the fundamental limitations of archaeological preservation. Historical records derive primarily from materials that survived environmental challenges across millennia, but survival rates vary dramatically based on construction materials, burial conditions, and climate factors. Stone structures in arid environments can persist for thousands of years with minimal deterioration. Wooden buildings in humid forest conditions might decompose completely within decades of abandonment. If sophisticated ancient civilizations primarily utilized organic materials for construction, their architectural achievements could vanish without leaving detectable traces. Advanced knowledge preserved in perishable media, leather, papyrus, bark, or textile, would disappear entirely under most environmental conditions. Even metallic artifacts can corrode beyond recognition if burial conditions promote oxidation or chemical breakdown. Recognition presents another fundamental challenge in archaeological interpretation. Ancient quarrying operations might appear indistinguishable from natural rock formations to untrained observers. Settlement remains can be mistaken for random stone distributions without systematic investigation. Artificial earthworks often get dismissed as natural geological features until detailed analysis reveals human modification patterns. Even when human origins become clearly established through careful investigation, determining specific functions and meanings remains problematic. Structural analysis can provide dating and construction techniques, but without written records or comparative examples, purposes remain speculative. Was a particular building a religious temple, defensive fortification, storage facility, or something entirely different from familiar categories? Interpretive frameworks necessarily rely on analogies with better documented sites, but unique structures resist easy categorization. This interpretive uncertainty contributes to the persistence of archaeological shadows, evidence that clearly exists but resists integration into comprehensive historical narratives. Individual sites might represent isolated anomalies or components of much larger networks that remain largely invisible due to preservation limitations and exploration gaps. Research methodology introduces additional complications beyond preservation and recognition challenges. Archaeological investigation operates within constraints imposed by funding availability, political accessibility, technological limitations, and individual researcher interests. Some regions receive intensive study because they offer easy access, clear connections to established chronologies, or alignment with current academic priorities. Other areas remain essentially unexplored due to remoteness, political instability, or perceived lack of significance. These uneven investigation patterns create systematic biases in the archaeological record. Well-studied regions become overrepresented in historical reconstructions, while underexplored territories contribute minimal evidence despite potentially containing crucial missing pieces. The geographical and chronological gaps in our knowledge might conceal entire civilizations whose achievements influence better documented cultures without receiving recognition. Occasional discoveries provide tantalizing hints of these missing connections. Structures built using techniques that seem too sophisticated for their supposed constructors suggest knowledge transmission from unidentified sources. Artifacts manufactured from materials sourced hundreds of kilometers away indicate trade networks that supposedly didn't exist during the relevant time periods. Settlement patterns reflecting shared understanding of resource distribution or defensive strategies point toward coordinated knowledge that no documented civilization should have possessed. Individual anomalies remain easy to dismiss through alternative explanations or methodological questioning. However, when similar unexplained patterns appear across multiple sites and regions, collective significance becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Clustering of anomalous evidence suggests systematic rather than random deviations from expected archaeological patterns. This accumulation creates shadow patterns within the historical record, areas where something clearly existed but remains insufficiently documented to support definitive interpretation. These shadows resemble photographic images with large blurred sections where shapes can be detected without clear detail. Evidence indicates presence without providing sufficient resolution to determine precise characteristics or significance. The scale of missing information remains fundamentally unknowable. Archaeological shadows might represent small gaps involving isolated sites or techniques. Alternatively, they could indicate vast civilizational achievements that rose and declined before documented history began recording human development. Without additional evidence, determining the magnitude of missing historical content remains impossible. Nevertheless, every artifact recovered, every site excavated, and every analytical result that produces unexpected dates contributes additional pieces to this incomplete puzzle. Some discoveries fit seamlessly into existing historical frameworks, confirming and refining established chronologies. Others require significant revision of theoretical models to accommodate new evidence. Some findings resist interpretation until subsequent discoveries provide contextual frameworks that make them comprehensible. This possibility of delayed understanding motivates continued archaeological investigation. While the visible record documents human achievement that survived preservation challenges, invisible shadows suggest additional content that might exceed our current imagination. The frustrating gaps in available evidence could be directing attention towards civilizational achievements much more extensive than recognized. Stone structures provide archaeology's most durable form of ancient communication, preserving information across millennia through nonverbal languages encoded in construction techniques, placement patterns, and orientational relationships. Unlike written records that speak directly through translated text, stone architecture communicates through spatial relationships, engineering solutions, and material choices that require different interpretive methods. When carved inscriptions appear in familiar scripts, direct translation provides immediate access to ancient intentions and knowledge. These textual communications can be compared with other documentary sources, cross-referenced for historical accuracy, and integrated into comprehensive narratives about their creators' goals and achievements. However, most stone structures communicate through subtler means that don't rely on linguistic translation. Their messages emerge through analysis of construction techniques, astronomical alignments, proportional relationships, and integration with surrounding landscapes. This architectural language proves more challenging to interpret, but potentially more revealing about practical knowledge and cultural sophistication. Most ancient stone structures communicate without linguistic elements. No inscriptions, numerical systems, or recognizable writing that permits direct translation. Instead, their language manifests through construction choices, manufacturing techniques, transportation methods, and spatial relationships with natural or celestial landmarks. Even seemingly mundane stones can reveal significant information about their creators' knowledge and capabilities through careful analysis. Surface examination provides immediate insights into construction methods and tool technology. Groove patterns worn into stone surfaces indicate repeated tool use in specific locations. Chisel mark characteristics reveal whether workers used metal implements or stone tools for shaping. Stone composition analysis can identify quarry sources, sometimes revealing transportation across hundreds of kilometers that suggests sophisticated logistics networks. Assembling these technical details gradually reveals the scope of ancient builders' knowledge and organizational capabilities. Stones fitted with perfect precision without mortar demonstrate advanced understanding of cutting and shaping techniques. Massive blocks positioned with apparent ease indicate transportation and lifting methods that would require significant planning and equipment, even with contemporary technology. This technical analysis becomes particularly intriguing when examining sites where stonework seems to exceed the documented capabilities of attributed cultures. Based on known tools and techniques, some construction achievements appear impossible for their supposed builders, leading researchers to consider alternative explanations involving inherited skills from earlier groups or contemporary assistance from unidentified civilizations with superior capabilities. Archaeological sites frequently display clear evidence of multiple construction phases spanning different time periods. Lower foundation layers might consist of enormous blocks fitted with extraordinary precision, while upper sections utilize smaller, roughly shaped stones clearly belonging to later building episodes. These stratified construction patterns suggest that later builders worked on foundations established by predecessors whose techniques they couldn't match or replicate. Temples and other structures often rest upon foundations that appear significantly older than the buildings themselves, indicating continuous use of sacred or strategically important locations across multiple civilizations. Isolated blocks exhibiting precision carving sometimes lie far from any known quarries, suggesting they once belonged to larger structures that have since disappeared, leaving only scattered remnants as evidence of their existence. Some stones display markings that don't correspond to any documented writing system, presenting interpretation challenges that could represent symbolic carvings, decorative patterns, or functional instructions for construction workers. Without contextual information, determining their specific meanings remains impossible. However, when similar markings appear at multiple sites separated by vast distances, they suggest shared traditions or common knowledge sources that transcend conventional understanding of ancient cultural boundaries. Astronomical alignment represents another crucial aspect of stone communication systems. Numerous ancient structures orient towards specific horizon points where the sun rises or sets during solstices or equinoxes, while others align with particular stars or constellations. These orientational choices demonstrate builders possess sophisticated understanding of celestial movements and temporal cycles important enough to incorporate into their architectural foundations. The precision achieved in astronomical alignments often reaches levels that challenge modern engineering capabilities. Creating such accuracy requires sustained observation periods combined with the mathematical knowledge necessary to translate celestial observations into construction specifications. If forgotten civilizations possessed these skills, their influence might have transmitted through subsequent cultures even when their identities were lost. Stone reuse complicates interpretation by mixing architectural messages from different historical periods. Later cultures discovering abandoned sites might salvage the best construction materials for new projects, preserving certain elements while destroying original design contexts. This practice creates palimpsest-like structures where multiple chronological layers overlap, making coherent interpretation significantly more challenging. Tool mark analysis helps researchers distinguish between construction phases by studying the shape, depth, and spacing characteristics of marks left on stone surfaces. Different tool types create distinctive signature patterns that can identify manufacturing techniques, and by extension, the technological capabilities of their users. When sites contain tool marks from implements that shouldn't exist during supposed construction periods, fundamental questions arise about chronological assumptions and technological development patterns. Several possibilities could explain anachronistic tool evidence. Builders might have possessed more advanced technology than historical models suggest. Stones might have been inherited from earlier groups with superior capabilities, or dating methods might be inaccurate. Each explanation carries significant implications for understanding ancient technological development and cultural transmission processes. Certain construction achievements continue defying straightforward explanation through known ancient capabilities. Giant blocks weighing dozens or hundreds of tons appear to have been moved and positioned with remarkable ease. Stones shaped with curves and angles of extraordinary precision would challenge reproduction using contemporary equipment on similar sites. Surfaces polished to mirror-like finishes employed techniques that remain partially mysterious despite extensive research efforts. While avoiding extreme speculative explanations, these achievements clearly required exceptional ingenuity, organizational coordination, and technical expertise uncommon even among well-documented ancient civilizations. If now lost cultures specialized in advanced stonework, their creations might have proven so durable that subsequent societies adopted and incorporated them long after their original builders vanished from historical memory. Weathering patterns provide another information source, though interpretation remains complex and uncertain. Erosion characteristics can suggest exposure duration, but measuring this accurately presents significant challenges. Structures showing weathering patterns inconsistent with supposed ages might actually be older than current dating indicates, or they might have been constructed using reclaimed materials from much older sources. Construction style analysis reveals intriguing patterns across geographically separated regions that supposedly lacked contact during relevant time periods. Massive polygonal walls appear in both Andean and Mediterranean contexts, raising questions about whether these similarities result from coincidence, independent invention, or knowledge transmission between distant civilizations through mechanisms we haven't identified. Geological activity and human intervention further complicates stone language interpretation by displacing original structural arrangements. Earthquakes, floods, and deliberate relocation can scatter architectural components, leading to misinterpretation when isolated elements are discovered in secondary positions rather than original contexts. This displacement creates interpretation challenges analogous to reconstructing sentences with randomly rearranged words. Despite these interpretive challenges, stone structures often represent our primary evidence for ancient capabilities and cultural values when written records are absent. While they cannot provide specific dates or personal names, they document what was technically possible and culturally significant to their builders. Stone messages can indicate knowledge networks, shared traditions, and capabilities that exceed conventional expectations for their supposed historical periods. Sometimes these stone communications point toward larger patterns or connections that individual elements don't reveal independently. A single carved block discovered in isolation might appear unremarkable until compared with similar elements found at distant locations, suggesting broader networks of cultural exchange or shared knowledge sources. Understanding stone language requires patience, technical expertise, and willingness to consider possibilities that extend beyond conventional historical frameworks. The stones preserve information across millennia, waiting for observers with appropriate knowledge and perspective to decode their messages about ancient human achievement, organizational capabilities, and technological understanding. These durable communications challenge us to reconsider assumptions about ancient limitations and possibilities. They suggest that human capabilities in remote periods might have exceeded our current models, whether through gradual development we haven't recognized or through knowledge transmission from sources we haven't identified yet. When identical stone types and carving techniques appear across distances of hundreds of kilometers, they suggest connections that transcend simple coincidence. These links might represent trade relationships, migration patterns, or shared cultural heritage, transmitted through mechanisms we haven't fully documented. As such connections multiply across archaeological sites, they begin forming the faint outlines of civilizations that haven't received official recognition in conventional historical narratives. Stone's exceptional durability creates both opportunities and challenges for archaeological interpretation. While organic materials like wood, textiles, and paper decompose relatively quickly, stone structures preserve information across millennia. This longevity makes stone invaluable for understanding ancient capabilities, but it also divorces surviving elements from their original contexts. Ancient stones function like isolated words from conversations whose surrounding dialogue has been lost to time. Interpreting these fragmentary stone messages requires patience and acceptance that complete understanding may remain impossible. However, periodic discoveries reveal connecting details, familiar tool marks, shared astronomical alignments, distinctive patterns that link previously isolated sites into broader networks. These moments of recognition provide glimpses into ancient languages of construction and communication that operated across vast geographical and temporal ranges. Cartographic evidence presents another fascinating window into ancient knowledge systems that challenge conventional assumptions about early human capabilities. While we typically associate sophisticated mapping with modern technological societies, archaeological discoveries occasionally reveal maps or map-like representations that seem to predate the supposed development of systematic geographic documentation. These early cartographic attempts don't resemble contemporary digital interfaces or printed charts, but they demonstrate careful observation, repeated travel, and systematic information preservation in forms that others could utilize practically. Some appear as stone carvings, clay tablet inscriptions, or wall paintings. Others survive as textual descriptions in ancient documents that reference locations far beyond what contemporary populations should have known about. Certain historical maps include geographical features that weren't officially discovered until thousands of years after the map's creation dates. Some display coastlines with configurations that match their appearance before the last ice age, when sea levels were dramatically lower than current levels. The existence of such accurate ancient geographical knowledge raises fundamental questions about information sources and transmission methods. While some cases might be explained through coincidence or gradual information accumulation from travelers across generations, others exhibit precision that's difficult to account for through conventional means. Imagine the organizational effort required for ancient cultures lacking modern surveying technology to accurately chart hundreds of kilometers of coastline, particularly without aerial or satellite imagery to provide broader geographical context. One frequently discussed example involves a 16th century map apparently showing detailed South American coastlines, alongside representations of Antarctica without ice coverage. Mainstream explanations suggest compilation from earlier source maps, which themselves might derive from even older geographic documentation. If accurate, this explanation shifts the fundamental question from identifying the 16th century cartographer to determining who originally gathered such extensive geographical knowledge. Indigenous mapping traditions predating European contact demonstrate remarkable accuracy across vast distances. Polynesian stick charts, for instance, record island positions, ocean current patterns, and wave characteristics across enormous Pacific expanses. While these don't conform to Western cartographic conventions, they function as highly effective navigational tools requiring specialized knowledge, extensive practice, and generational transmission systems. If such traditions began earlier than currently recognized, they could have mapped enormous oceanic regions long before outside contact occurred. The sophisticated navigational knowledge preserved in these systems suggests capabilities that might extend much deeper into the past than conventional chronologies indicate. Stone carvings throughout Europe and the Middle East sometimes display layouts resembling local landscapes viewed from aerial perspectives, rivers, hills, settlements arranged in ways that correspond to actual geographical features. Without accompanying written explanations, definitive interpretation remains impossible, but the resemblances suggest that even without formal cartographic systems, ancient populations developed effective methods for representing spatial information visually. The possibility that maps preserve knowledge much older than their apparent creation dates becomes plausible when considering human memory and transmission patterns. Detailed geographical information could be copied and recopied across generations, with each iteration adding modifications while gradually obscuring original contexts. Over centuries, maps might pass through numerous cultures, accumulating details and interpretations until their original creators' identities disappear completely. This transmission model introduces the possibility of unknown civilizations contributing to geographical knowledge. When maps or map-like representations display accuracy or detail inconsistent with their supposed historical periods, one explanation involves information sources we haven't identified, perhaps seafaring cultures with extensive trade networks or land-based civilizations with skilled surveying capabilities and motivations for documenting distant regions. Map preservation presents significant challenges beyond those affecting stone architecture. Unlike durable monuments, most early maps would have been created on organic materials, animal skins, textiles, bark, or early paper that decay rapidly without special protection. Most ancient cartographic knowledge probably vanished within centuries of creation, leaving only occasional survivals that provide glimpses of much larger lost traditions. Nevertheless, geographical information occasionally survives through indirect preservation methods. Maps might be copied into manuscripts centuries after original creation, maintaining details from much older sources. Geographical knowledge might be embedded within narratives describing travel routes or coastline features with sufficient specificity that modern comparison reveals correspondence with real locations. Sometimes geographical information appears within mythological contexts, descriptions of lands across oceans or islands positioned relative to each other in ways that later prove accurate. While such sources can't be treated as literal documentation, those that correspond too precisely with actual geography to represent coincidence deserve serious consideration. When multiple geographically separated cultures describe identical remote locations with similar details, they might be drawing upon common information sources rather than developing independent knowledge. Such patterns suggest possible shared cartographic traditions that extended across much larger geographical ranges than conventional models indicate. Ancient structures sometimes function as three-dimensional maps rather than portable documents. Arrangements of stones, earthworks, or mound systems can align to represent constellation patterns or outline regional geographical features. These spatial representations suggest sophisticated understanding of both geography and symbolic systems, combined with deliberate intentions to preserve information physically across extended time periods. This approach to cartographic preservation demonstrates that mapping knowledge could be embedded within landscapes themselves, creating permanent geographical documentation that wouldn't depend upon fragile organic materials. Such systems would be particularly valuable for cultures that prioritized long-term information preservation or operated across territories too extensive for portable map management. The sophistication implied by these various cartographic evidence types suggests that ancient geographical knowledge might have been much more extensive and precise than conventional historical models indicate. Whether this knowledge developed through gradual accumulation by documented cultures or was transmitted from earlier civilizations with advanced capabilities remains an open question that archaeological discoveries continue to illuminate. Understanding ancient mapping traditions requires recognizing that effective geographical documentation could take forms quite different from contemporary cartographic conventions while still preserving accurate and useful spatial information across generations. Contemporary geographical documentation remains incomplete despite advanced technological capabilities. Vast ocean regions lack detailed charting beyond basic satellite surveys, while some terrestrial areas retain minimal documentation beyond aerial imagery. If ancient civilizations possess strong navigational traditions and dedicated generations to systematic exploration and documentation, They might have accumulated geographical knowledge that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. This knowledge wouldn't necessarily require advanced technology in contemporary terms, just sustained commitment to exploration, careful observation, and systematic information preservation across multiple generations. Map preservation extends beyond material durability to encompass cultural value systems that determine whether geographical knowledge gets copied, taught, and transmitted through successive generations. If hypothetical unknown civilizations created comprehensive mapping systems, their cartographic information could have been inherited by later cultures who adapted the material for contemporary use without understanding its true antiquity. This transmission process would mean that some of our earliest documented maps might actually represent compilations of much older geographical knowledge. Evidence for such ancient information could be concealed within seemingly anachronistic features, accurate details of locations supposedly undiscovered during the map's creation period, or geographical features depicted as they would have appeared under different climatic conditions. These anomalous elements might represent fragments of ancient knowledge that survived the compilation process, despite being poorly understood by later cartographers. Maps function as more than navigational tools. They represent statements about what their creators considered worth documenting and preserving. Inclusion patterns reveal priorities and knowledge boundaries, while omissions might indicate either limited exploration or deliberate information concealment. Strategic omissions could hide valuable geographical knowledge from competitors, with complete information remaining privately held while public versions showed only selected details. Future discoveries of ancient cartographic evidence likely won't arrive with clear attribution explaining origins and purposes. More probable scenarios involve subtle details within known maps that don't conform to expected knowledge for their supposed time periods. Recognition might come only through comparison with modern geographical data that reveals impossible accuracy for the supposed creation context. Such discoveries would illuminate not just individual maps, but entire knowledge networks. The journeys undertaken, observations recorded, and information transmission systems operating across years or centuries. Maps represent destinations for accumulated geographical knowledge, but they also document countless individual steps taken by explorers whose identities are now lost to historical memory. Mythological traditions possess remarkable survival capabilities. Despite continuous transformation, stories change shape across generations, with details shifting and characters being renamed or replaced, while essential structural elements endure. Tales told in one generation get repeated by successors with small modifications, then passed along again until centuries separate current versions from original sources. Contemporary storytellers often have no awareness of mythological origins, viewing traditional narratives simply as inherited cultural elements that have always existed within their communities. Historical scholarship initially dismissed mythological traditions as primitive entertainment or inadequate explanations for natural phenomena, viewing them as evidence of intellectual limitations rather than potential historical documentation. However, 20th century research began recognizing that mythological narratives, while not literally accurate in every detail, can preserve authentic memories of real events, places, and people from periods predating written documentation. Careful analysis that strips away symbolic layers sometimes reveals mythological foundations describing events that could have actually occurred. Flood narratives might preserve memories of genuine inundations, even when accounts have been magnified through generational transmission. Stories about cities consumed by ocean waters might echo authentic memories of coastal settlements lost to rising sea levels. Legends describing visitors from across distant waters could reflect genuine contact between geographically separated cultures. This interpretive approach becomes crucial for investigating unknown civilizations, because mythological traditions can preserve historical fragments from times and places where physical evidence hasn't survived archaeological processes. Cultures might forget specific place names while preserving distinctive geographical features through story form. They might lose precise chronological details while maintaining memories of significant consequences and effects. Flood mythologies appear across virtually every global region in various forms. Some portray divine floods intended to cleanse or punish the world. Others describe natural disasters forcing population displacement, and many combine both elements. Specific details vary significantly: duration, water height, survival methods, but core concepts remain consistent: great inundations that transform everything fundamentally. Comparison between mythological flood accounts and geological evidence reveals correspondence with documented events like sudden valley flooding at the last ice age's conclusion. Other mythological floods prove harder to correlate with known geological events, but they raise questions about whether they describe phenomena we haven't yet identified scientifically. If advanced civilizations existed in coastal regions now submerged beneath ocean waters, their destruction could be preserved as flood mythologies transmitted by survivors and absorbed into other groups' oral traditions. These mythological preservations might represent our only remaining evidence of sophisticated societies whose physical remains lie inaccessible beneath modern sea levels. Lost land mythologies present another significant category, including Greek Atlantis traditions, Tamil Kumari Kandam stories, and Cornish Leonis legends. Each describes large, prosperous territories that disappeared, typically beneath ocean waters. While some might be entirely symbolic constructions and others represent exaggerated, smaller-scale events, the persistent thematic recurrence suggests cultural resonance that transcends simple fiction. Certain mythological traditions preserve remarkably specific geographical details, despite their fantastic narrative contexts. Islands might be described as lying specific journey distances in particular directions, featuring distinctive mountain formations or unique river arrangements. Without cartographic documentation, such descriptions require direct experiential knowledge, either from storytellers themselves or from sources they learned from. Even obviously fictionalized mythologies could therefore preserve authentic geographical information about real locations visited in remote historical periods. Culture-bringer mythologies represent another category deserving attention for investigating unknown civilizations. Many traditional narratives feature figures, sometimes portrayed as divine beings, sometimes as heroes, occasionally as unnamed strangers, who arrive from distant locations and impart crucial skills and knowledge to local populations. These educational visitors typically teach practical capabilities like agriculture, construction techniques, astronomical observation, or technological innovations before departing without establishing permanent settlement. The widespread occurrence of culture-bringer narratives across geographically separated societies suggests possible historical foundations involving knowledge transmission from advanced groups to less developed communities. Such mythological patterns could preserve memories of contact with representatives from sophisticated civilizations whose achievements exceeded contemporary cultural capabilities. The knowledge transmitted through these encounters might have been incorporated into recipient societies, while the original sources were gradually forgotten, eventually surviving only as mythological traditions about divine or heroic teachers. Understanding mythological preservation requires recognizing that oral traditions can maintain essential historical information across remarkably long periods, even as specific details undergo continuous transformation. The structural persistence of certain mythological themes across multiple cultures suggests possible common historical foundations that predate documented cultural contact. These preserved memories might represent our primary remaining evidence for civilizations whose physical traces have been destroyed or remain undiscovered, making mythological analysis an essential component of investigating humanity's potentially more complex ancient past. Culture-bringer narratives typically describe visiting figures who introduce transformative knowledge including agricultural techniques, metallurgy, navigation methods, and social organizational systems. Some stories portray these teachers remaining to become integrated community members, while others describe mysterious departures that mirror their unexplained arrivals. The consistency of these narrative patterns across geographically isolated cultures proves particularly striking when examining specific details that vary while maintaining identical structural frameworks. The recurring theme involves external knowledge sources that fundamentally transform recipient societies through education rather than conquest. Within the context of investigating unknown civilizations, these mythological patterns could represent distorted memories of authentic historical contact. Perhaps advanced groups visited multiple locations systematically, sharing portions of their knowledge base, with those encounters preserved through the only available medium, oral storytelling traditions. Contemporary research demonstrates that oral traditions can maintain remarkable factual accuracy across extended chronological periods. Australian Aboriginal stories describing coastal geography as it existed over 7,000 years ago, before significant sea level changes, provide compelling evidence of long-term information preservation. These accounts aren't vague or symbolic, but contain specific details that correspond to modern scientific reconstructions of ancient landscapes. Such precision demonstrates that storytelling traditions can carry authentic factual content across enormous time spans, while other narrative elements undergo mythologization or symbolic transformation. This preservation capability suggests that culture-bringer myths might retain historical kernels despite their fantastic embellishments. Astronomical references within mythological contexts provide additional verification opportunities. Stories incorporating stellar alignments, solar and lunar cycles, eclipse descriptions, or comet appearances can be dated through astronomical calculation, potentially providing temporal frameworks for original narrative foundations. Some research has successfully traced mythological origins thousands of years backward, predating the documented cultures that eventually recorded them in written form. However, mythological preservation involves complex transformation processes shaped by successive communities' needs, values, and belief systems. Elements get added, modified, or removed to serve contemporary purposes, entertainment, moral instruction, or theological alignment. Original historical events can become buried beneath accumulated symbolic layers, but this doesn't eliminate their foundational significance. It simply requires more sophisticated analytical techniques to recover authentic elements. Archaeological and anthropological approaches to mythological analysis treat traditional narratives as complex puzzles requiring systematic deconstruction. Researchers identify component elements, compare them across cultural boundaries, and search for recurring themes that might indicate shared historical foundations. When identical unusual details appear in geographically separated mythological traditions, they potentially represent evidence that both derive from common historical events. For investigating forgotten civilizations, mythological traditions function as interpretive maps that guide physical investigation efforts. While not providing literal geographical directions, they can indicate regions or phenomena worth examining for supporting archaeological evidence. Even partially accurate myths might lead to significant discoveries by directing attention toward previously overlooked areas or time periods. Some mythological traditions might represent deliberately constructed information preservation systems. Cultures lacking written documentation or concerned about textual vulnerability might have embedded crucial knowledge within memorable narrative formats tied to meaningful cultural practices. By associating information with emotionally resonant stories and ritual activities, they increased survival probability across generational transmission. Whether these knowledge preservation efforts were conscious historical documentation attempts or natural products of oral tradition development, their survival across vast chronological spans remains remarkable. They connect contemporary communities to memorial chains extending far beyond written record limitations, potentially including links forged by people whose identities and cultures have vanished while their experiential echoes persist in traditional narratives. Archaeological discoveries typically fall into predictable categories that align with established chronological frameworks, technological expectations, and cultural contexts. These findings confirm existing models while providing refined details about known civilizations and their achievements. However, periodic discoveries challenge conventional understanding by appearing ahead of theoretical schedules, in unexpected locations, or associated with cultures that supposedly lacked relevant capabilities. Out-of-place artifacts represent this challenging category, objects that disrupt established timelines and force reconsideration of technological development patterns or cultural contact mechanisms. These anomalies range from small items like metal tools discovered in geological layers, predating supposed metallurgical development by millennia, to large architectural elements employing construction techniques that theoretically hadn't been invented yet. Initial responses to such discoveries typically involve methodological skepticism, often justified by legitimate error possibilities. Geological processes including flooding, seismic activity, or erosion can disturb soil stratification and displace artifacts from their original contexts. Human activities like construction, burial practices, or refuse disposal can introduce materials into older layers. Dating methodologies carry inherent error margins, and material identification can be mistaken. However, even after accounting for these error sources, certain discoveries resist conventional explanation. Bronze objects of sophisticated craftsmanship found in sites predating regional bronze technology by centuries present interpretive challenges. Map fragments showing accurate geographical details, supposedly impossible for their creation periods, force reconsideration of ancient knowledge capabilities. Complex mechanical devices discovered among otherwise simple tool assemblages suggest technological capabilities that exceed theoretical expectations. The Antikythera mechanism exemplifies this phenomenon perfectly. Discovered off the Greek coast in the early 20th century, this device functions as an analog computer for astronomical predictions dating to over 2,000 years ago. Its mechanical complexity remained unmatched for more than a millennium following its creation. Initial scholarly responses assumed modern contamination of the archaeological site, but repeated investigation confirmed its authentic antiquity. More controversial examples include objects allegedly millions of years old, embedded within rock formations or coal deposits that supposedly predate human existence entirely. Mainstream archaeology typically dismisses these claims with reasonable justification based on methodological problems. However, their persistent recurrence demonstrates widespread fascination with possibilities of advanced knowledge existing much earlier than conventional models suggest. Within the framework of investigating unknown civilizations, out-of-place objects might represent physical evidence of cultural contact. Traders from technologically superior societies could have exchanged goods with smaller, less developed communities, leaving behind items that later generations would find inexplicable within their historical contexts. Such contact scenarios would explain technological anomalies without requiring complete revision of established chronologies, instead suggesting that advanced knowledge existed in isolated pockets before becoming widespread. These interaction patterns could account for sophisticated achievements that appear ahead of their theoretical development schedules, while maintaining overall historical frameworks. The accumulation of out-of-place evidence, when considered collectively rather than individually, might reveal patterns indicating systematic knowledge transmission from sources we haven't identified. Rather than random anomalies requiring separate explanations, these discoveries could represent fragments of larger networks involving civilizations whose achievements exceeded our current understanding of ancient capabilities. Evaluating such possibilities requires balancing methodological skepticism with openness to evidence that challenges established models. While most anomalous discoveries admit conventional explanations, some might indicate genuine gaps in our understanding of ancient human achievement and cultural interaction patterns that extended across much larger geographical and chronological ranges than currently recognized. Cultural collapse survivors might have transported precious tools or ceremonial objects while integrating into other societies, creating archaeological confusion when these advanced items appear within otherwise simple material assemblages. Individual sophisticated artifacts within predominantly basic tool collections could represent anomalies, trade acquisitions, or ancestral heirlooms preserved across generations. However, when multiple such objects appear across different sites sharing similar characteristics, the possibility of common sources becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. Material evidence extends beyond tools and weapons to encompass decorative and luxury items that reveal extensive cultural connections. Beads manufactured from non-local materials, ornaments displaying distant cultural styles, and dyes requiring plants cultivated far from discovery locations all indicate movement and knowledge exchange. When these items appear in regions where no documented trade routes existed, they hint at connection networks that haven't been historically recognized. Object reuse presents another complicating factor in archaeological interpretation. Communities discovering ruins from older, more technologically advanced settlements might salvage useful materials, stone blocks, metal fragments, processed timber, adapting them for contemporary purposes. Over time, these salvaged items' origins would be forgotten while their physical presence persisted, creating interpretive challenges for future archaeologists attempting to understand their contexts. Craftsmanship quality itself sometimes presents analytical puzzles. Certain stone carvings demonstrate symmetry and surface finish levels that require advanced tool technology to achieve. When similar execution standards appear across geographically separated sites, questions arise about whether specialized knowledge spread through cultural contact or developed independently in multiple locations. Approaching anomalous discoveries requires methodological caution to avoid premature conclusions. Extraordinary claims can attract attention for extended periods, even when subsequently debunked through improved analysis. Legitimate archaeological investigation of genuinely anomalous artifacts typically involves extended, careful processes including additional testing, expanded contextual investigation, and consideration of alternative explanations before drawing major conclusions. Nevertheless, every confirmed out-of-place object necessitates some adjustment in historical understanding. Sometimes these revisions prove minor, slight modifications to technological development timelines or trade route documentation. Other cases require more significant adjustments, suggesting previously unrecognized contact between supposedly isolated cultures. The fundamental challenge involves the rarity of such discoveries. If forgotten civilizations existed, their physical remnants might be scattered sparsely across global archaeological sites, mixed within other cultures' artifact assemblages. Identification requires both discovery luck and analytical capability to recognize items that don't conform to established patterns. Additional possibilities involve objects that have already been discovered but misattributed to incorrect time periods or cultural groups. Artifacts might remain in museum collections for decades before someone recognizes they don't match their assigned categories. Advancing dating technologies and material analysis methods are beginning to reveal some of these classification errors. Out-of-place objects function like loose threads in historical fabric. Pulling one might lead nowhere, or it might unravel portions of accepted historical understanding, revealing previously unrecognized patterns. Each anomalous discovery possesses potential significance ranging from simple oddity to crucial evidence for much larger historical revision. Beyond written documentation, physical artifacts and architectural ruins lies another historical record that accompanies us constantly: our genetic inheritance. DNA contains more than individual biological blueprints. It preserves continuous documentation of human origins shaped by every preceding generation. Genetic information accumulates like geological sediment, with ancient layers dating to earliest human development overlaid by more recent evidence of interactions and migrations occurring within recent millennia. Between these temporal extremes lie countless traces of people who lived, traveled, and established families in locations that may or may not correspond to documented historical narratives. Modern genetic research can analyze these accumulated layers, revealing where populations intermixed and when such interactions occurred. Sometimes genetic findings align with existing archaeological and historical knowledge, providing confirmation and refined details about established timelines. Other discoveries fill previously unrecognized gaps in our understanding. Most significantly, some genetic evidence challenges fundamental assumptions by revealing connections between groups previously assumed to have remained isolated from each other. The discovery that all non-African humans carry small percentages of Neanderthal DNA provides a clear example of genetic evidence overturning established theories. For years, dominant scientific opinion suggested minimal direct contact between humans and Neanderthals beyond occasional territorial competition. However, genetic analysis proved these groups did interact, leaving permanent marks in contemporary human genetic codes. Similar genetic revelations include populations in Oceania carrying DNA from Denisovans, an ancient human group discovered entirely through genetic analysis of limited fossil remains consisting of a single finger bone and several teeth. This entire branch of human family tree became known not through extensive fossil sites, but through genetic echoes preserved in living people's DNA. Within the framework of investigating unknown civilizations, genetic evidence might indicate contact with groups that left no clear archaeological footprints. If small, distinct populations existed in remote areas while occasionally intermixing with neighboring cultures, their DNA could survive in modern populations even when all other evidence of their existence vanished. This preservation mechanism proves particularly relevant for seafaring cultures. Groups with advanced long-distance navigation capabilities might have visited distant territories and established families with local populations. Across generations, their distinctive genetic markers could spread far beyond original homelands, even when their settlements didn't survive archaeological preservation. Genetic research also reveals ancient migration patterns through comparison between DNA from ancient skeletal remains and modern populations. These analyses sometimes enable tracking of population movements across thousands of years. Such genetic migration patterns don't always correspond to routes suggested by archaeological evidence alone, hinting that additional factors, trade relationships, climate changes, or contact with unfamiliar cultures influence settlement decisions. These genetic discoveries raise profound questions about human movement and cultural interaction throughout prehistory. If genetic evidence reveals population mixing in regions where no archaeological evidence suggests contact, it implies missing chapters in human migration and cultural development stories. Advanced ancient civilizations with sophisticated navigation or trade capabilities could have established contact networks that left genetic evidence, while their material culture disappeared through environmental degradation or archaeological inaccessibility. Their contributions to human genetic diversity might represent the primary surviving evidence of their existence and influence. Genetic analysis of isolated populations sometimes reveals unexpected diversity, suggesting historical contact with multiple distinct groups. If some of these genetic contributions derive from civilizations we haven't identified archaeologically, they could provide crucial evidence for human achievement and cultural complexity that exceeds our current historical understanding. The genetic record preserves information across much longer timescales than most archaeological evidence, making it particularly valuable for investigating ancient human populations and their interactions. As genetic analysis techniques continue advancing, they may reveal additional evidence for human cultural complexity and technological achievement in remote historical periods. Understanding genetic evidence requires recognizing that human population history proves far more complex and interconnected than simple linear migration models suggest. The accumulation of genetic mixing across millennia creates intricate patterns that reflect sophisticated networks of human interaction, trade, and cultural exchange, extending much deeper into the past than conventional historical models typically acknowledge. Genetic research has identified ghost populations, groups that must have existed historically, because their DNA signatures appear in contemporary people, yet no direct archaeological or written evidence documents their presence. These phantom civilizations leave no skeletal remains, artifacts, or textual accounts, existing solely as genetic patterns that don't correspond to any recognized historical culture. Such populations could represent the faintest surviving traces of unknown civilizations that flourished in regions where preservation conditions prevented archaeological survival. Ghost populations might have thrived in environments where organic materials decomposed rapidly, leaving no physical evidence in archaeological strata. They could have been absorbed so completely into other cultures that all visible signs of their distinct identity disappeared, preserving only genetic markers in descendant populations. This absorption process would explain how sophisticated knowledge and techniques could appear in cultures that seemingly developed them independently. Genetic analysis reveals additional information through shared trait distribution between geographically separated populations. Specific adaptations like adult lactose tolerance or high-altitude physiological optimization can spread rapidly when they provide survival advantages. When distant populations share unusual genetic adaptations, it suggests either common ancestry or historical contact that facilitated trait transmission. Sometimes genetic connections appear before archaeological evidence can explain the interaction mechanisms involved. These genetic links guide researchers toward previously overlooked possibilities for ancient cultural contact and knowledge exchange across much larger geographical ranges than conventional models typically acknowledge. Contemporary genetic research has democratized through commercial DNA testing, with millions of people contributing saliva samples to massive genetic databases originally designed for personal ancestry exploration. While primarily serving individual curiosity, these databases have revealed unexpected population connections and migration patterns not recorded in historical documentation. However, genetic interpretation requires careful methodological consideration. DNA evidence demonstrates that populations shared ancestry, but doesn't specify the mechanisms through which genetic mixing occurred. Contact might have resulted from peaceful trade relationships, voluntary migration, forced displacement, or numerous other historical processes. Additionally, genetic dating provides estimates with significant uncertainty ranges rather than precise chronological determination. Despite these limitations, Genetic evidence pointing toward specific connections can guide archaeological investigation toward regions and time periods deserving closer examination. DNA represents perhaps the most democratic historical record available, carried by everyone regardless of social status or economic capability to commission monuments or written documentation. Genetic inheritance preserves the history of people who left no physical traces and might never appear in written records, yet whose descendants remain alive today. If advanced or far-reaching civilizations existed, but are now lost to conventional archaeology, their primary surviving legacy might exist within our genetic codes. These vanished groups might have been traders, explorers, or migrants who intermixed with populations across vast distances, leaving behind children who matured within entirely different cultural contexts while carrying genetic echoes of their ancestors. While shared genetic markers don't automatically prove unknown civilizations existed, they demonstrate contact between groups that conventional history doesn't recognize. Combined with other evidence categories, anomalous artifacts, unexpected monument alignments, mythological similarities, genetic connections help build comprehensive cases that human ancient history involved more complexity than currently recognized. As genetic research techniques advance, additional ghostly fingerprints may emerge within our DNA, each serving as reminders that civilizations can leave traces in descendant populations even when no stone architecture, written language, or physical tools survive. Certain archaeological structures possess qualities that immediately arrest attention through their apparent displacement from expected historical and technological contexts. These buildings demonstrate precision, technological sophistication, or ambitious scale that seems inconsistent with surrounding cultural capabilities. They appear as temporal anomalies, pieces of advanced engineering inserted into historical periods where such achievements shouldn't theoretically be possible. Conventional understanding portrays architectural development as steady progression from simple to complex, basic shelters evolving into huts, houses, fortifications, temples, and palaces through gradual technological accumulation. However, actual archaeological evidence reveals a much less orderly pattern, including sudden innovation bursts that appear without clear developmental predecessors, then disappear equally abruptly. Sometimes these technological leaps occur in apparent isolation without obvious external influences. Other instances seem to draw upon knowledge that shouldn't theoretically exist during their construction periods. These anomalies raise fundamental questions about technological development patterns and knowledge transmission mechanisms operating in ancient societies. Massive stone block construction exemplifies this phenomenon. Some sites employ blocks weighing dozens or hundreds of tons, cut and positioned with precision, creating nearly invisible joining seams. These arrangements suggest not only advanced engineering capabilities, but sophisticated understanding of seismic stability through design choices that enable structural survival across centuries of earthquake activity. Other locations display corbelled arches, intricate vaulting systems, or surprisingly sophisticated drainage infrastructure, appearing within cultures that supposedly lacked the knowledge or tools necessary for such construction. Conventional explanations suggest technique borrowing from neighboring civilizations, but investigation often reveals that potential source cultures also lack evidence of possessing these capabilities. Particularly intriguing examples involve structures where the oldest sections demonstrate the most advanced construction techniques. Temples built upon foundations exhibiting far greater precision than overlying buildings create reverse technological progression patterns. Walls with expertly fitted lower stone courses supporting rougher, less stable upper sections from later construction periods directly contradict expectations of linear technological advancement. Material selection presents additional analytical challenges. Some ancient builders utilized extremely difficult stone types like granite and basalt that require sustained effort to shape and polish even with contemporary tools. Yet certain sites employ these challenging materials extensively in ways suggesting both aesthetic preferences and complete technical mastery of working methods. Several locations source these difficult stones from quarries many kilometers away, often across rivers or steep terrain. Transportation would have required either enormous human labor forces or ingenious engineering solutions, yet no clear documentation of methods survives. The logistics alone suggest organizational capabilities and technical knowledge that exceed conventional assumptions about ancient civilizations. Architectural displacement also manifests through small-scale details that reveal sophisticated understanding of construction principles. Precision joints, water management systems, acoustic engineering, and astronomical alignments demonstrate knowledge integration across multiple technical disciplines. These details often prove more revealing than massive construction projects because they reflect deep understanding rather than simple labor mobilization. Some sites incorporate mathematical relationships in their proportional systems that weren't supposedly discovered until much later historical periods. Others demonstrate acoustic properties that require advanced understanding of sound behavior within architectural spaces. Many align precisely with astronomical phenomena in ways that demand sustained observational programs and sophisticated calculation capabilities. The global distribution of similar advanced techniques across supposedly isolated cultures raises questions about knowledge transmission mechanisms. Identical construction methods appearing simultaneously in geographically separated regions suggest either remarkable coincidence, independent parallel development, or contact networks that haven't been historically recognized. These architectural anomalies resist easy integration into conventional historical narratives because they challenge fundamental assumptions about ancient technological capabilities and cultural development patterns. They suggest that human achievement in remote periods might have exceeded our current models, whether through gradual advancement we haven't recognized or knowledge transmission from sources we haven't identified. Understanding these displaced architectural achievements requires reconsidering assumptions about ancient limitations and possibilities, while remaining methodologically rigorous about evidence, evaluation, and interpretation processes. Perfectly circular holes drilled through stone with remarkable depth and uniformity challenge assumptions about ancient tool capabilities. These drilling marks exceed what should be possible using documented technologies from their supposed time periods. Mathematical precision in masonry patterns suggests geometric understanding that surpasses what we've attributed to these cultures, indicating knowledge systems more sophisticated than conventional historical models recognize. Urban planning examples reveal comprehensive design thinking that appears anachronistically advanced. Grid systems, water distribution networks, and waste management infrastructure represent hallmarks of systematic urban development that supposedly emerged much later in other global regions. When such planning appears early in the archaeological record, it raises fundamental questions about knowledge sources and transmission mechanisms. These advancement bursts might result from lost cultural exchanges where traveling groups introduced ideas from distant regions, leading to brief implementation periods before techniques faded from use. Alternative explanations involve knowledge inheritance from previous local cultures whose identities subsequently disappeared, leaving only scattered evidence of their sophisticated capabilities. Particularly puzzling examples involve architectural styles appearing fully mature without local precedent or developmental stages in the archaeological record. Most building techniques evolve gradually through experimentation and refinement, so perfected methods appearing suddenly suggest builders already possessed complete understanding of construction principles and execution methods. Astronomical alignments provide additional evidence of sophisticated knowledge systems. Structures positioned with extraordinary accuracy relative to cardinal directions, solstices, equinoxes, or specific stellar positions require combinations of careful observation, mathematical skills, and precise architectural execution. Sometimes the precision levels achieved challenge assumptions that builders possessed only basic sighting tools without more sophisticated instruments. While unusual architectural features don't automatically indicate unknown civilizations, some sites accumulate multiple anomalies simultaneously: advanced techniques, unusual materials, and inexplicable precision, concentrating in single locations without clear cultural or historical development pathways to explain their presence. The disappearance of certain techniques presents equally puzzling questions. If cultures develop highly effective building methods, continued utilization would be expected. However, some regions demonstrate opposite patterns where sophisticated methods appear briefly, then get abandoned, replaced by less durable or less sophisticated approaches. This suggests either knowledge loss or priority changes, both possible if original builders were replaced or absorbed by different groups. Comparing anomalies across geographical regions sometimes reveals concerning patterns. Similar masonry styles appear in ocean-separated locations, Comparable urban layouts emerge in areas that supposedly lacked contact according to historical records. While independent invention remains theoretically possible, repeated coincidences in complex techniques strain conventional explanations. If unknown civilizations possessed advanced architectural knowledge, their fingerprints might survive in foundations and older structural elements of buildings we assume we understand completely. However, architecture proves vulnerable to destruction through warfare, seismic activity, weathering, and material degradation. Contemporary remains represent fractions of original construction, with the most impressive achievements potentially lost to time. Nevertheless, surviving pieces raise sufficient questions to suggest that remote historical periods might have included builders creating structures beyond their supposed capabilities using methods we cannot fully explain or replicate. Tools provide among the clearest indicators of technological development, with historical progression typically charted through materials and manufacturing methods. Stone, bronze, iron, steel representing sequential advancement stages. Each technological step opens new possibilities while older methods fade through replacement with superior alternatives. Occasionally, discoveries reveal tools or devices that don't conform to expected developmental progressions. These artifacts aren't simply ancient. They demonstrate capabilities that seem displaced from their historical contexts, sometimes exhibiting qualities difficult to reproduce using contemporary methods. Forgotten technological knowledge manifests through literal tools, including chisels, drills, and cutting implements, manufactured using materials or techniques inappropriate for their supposed time periods. Complex devices like measuring instruments, mechanical systems, or chemical processes represent more sophisticated examples requiring extensive knowledge chains for creation and effective utilization. Such discoveries raise fundamental questions about their creators and the reasons why manufacturing knowledge disappeared. Sometimes disappearance proves explicable through resource depletion or accessibility loss. Specialized materials available only in particular regions might become unusable when those areas were abandoned. More efficient replacement methods could supplant older techniques so completely that traditional knowledge failed to transmit across generations. Other cases resist straightforward explanation. Artifacts demonstrating craftsmanship levels requiring specific tool and process combinations appear in regions where no known cultures possessed necessary capabilities. These examples suggest knowledge systems that operated beyond our current understanding of ancient technological development. Ancient stonework provides compelling examples through drill holes exhibiting spiral grooves, indicating rotary drilling methods capable of rapid, even material removal. Contemporary replication requires high-quality drill bits and steady rotational power, yet these stones date to periods when documented tools couldn't produce such marks with comparable speed or precision. Metallurgical examples reveal similar temporal displacement. Certain artifacts show metal purity or alloy compositions exceeding supposed technological capabilities for their time periods. Some ancient steel demonstrated corrosion resistance lasting centuries in harsh environments, with modern metallurgists only recently developing replication methods, often with considerable difficulty. Textile evidence includes ancient fabrics with weaving patterns so fine and consistent that contemporary machinery struggles to reproduce them at commercial scales. Natural dyes, maintaining vibrant colors across thousands of years, employed formulas that remain undiscovered despite extensive research efforts. Chemical technologies present additional mysteries through processes that produced results we cannot fully explain or duplicate. Ancient adhesives, preservatives, and material treatments sometimes exceeded contemporary chemical achievements while using supposedly simple ingredients and methods. These technological anomalies suggest that human knowledge in remote periods might have included capabilities we've forgotten or never properly understood. Whether such knowledge developed through gradual innovation by documented cultures or represented inheritance from more advanced civilizations remains an open question that continues challenging our understanding of ancient human achievement. The persistence of these technological mysteries across multiple disciplines, architecture, metallurgy, textiles, chemistry, indicates systematic knowledge gaps in our historical understanding, rather than isolated anomalies requiring individual explanations. The accumulated evidence suggests ancient human capabilities might have exceeded our current models significantly, whether through development pathways we haven't recognized or knowledge transmission from sources we haven't identified. Understanding these lost technologies requires balancing appreciation for ancient human ingenuity with recognition that some achievements appear to surpass reasonable expectations for their supposed historical contexts. The challenge lies in determining which explanations best account for the evidence, while remaining open to possibilities that might require significant revision of our fundamental assumptions about ancient technological development and cultural transmission processes. These forgotten capabilities remind us that human knowledge doesn't always progress in linear fashion, and that sophisticated understanding can be lost as easily as it can be gained, leaving only puzzling traces for future generations to contemplate and attempt to understand. Chemical compounds used for preservation, waterproofing, and material strengthening discovered on ancient objects represent sophisticated knowledge systems whose exact formulations and production methods have been completely lost. Sometimes analysis reveals unexpected ingredients that shouldn't exist in particular time periods or geographical locations, indicating either extensive trade connections to distant regions or access to resources that have since become unavailable or extinct. Particularly striking aspects of these lost technologies involve their sudden appearance as fully developed systems rather than gradual knowledge accumulation. Advanced capabilities emerge without clear developmental precedents, suggesting creators already possess deep understanding of manufacturing principles and applications. Then, for unexplained reasons, this knowledge failed to transmit to subsequent generations, creating technological gaps that mirror architectural anomalies. This pattern reflects broader phenomena, where bursts of advanced capability appear disconnected from earlier or later skill levels within the same regions. If cultures inherited sophisticated tools or techniques from external sources, it would explain both sudden appearance and equally rapid disappearance when transmission chains were broken. Specialized tool categories present additional interpretive challenges. Highly specific instruments designed for purposes we no longer recognize might be overlooked or misunderstood. Unusual blade configurations that appear ornamental might have been perfectly optimized for particular crafts or materials. Device markings that seem decorative could represent functional measurement systems lost to contemporary understanding. Tool knowledge disappearance doesn't always result from neglect or disinterest. Political collapse, warfare, and natural disasters can eliminate not just populations but entire infrastructural systems required for specialized manufacturing. If particular instruments required multiple specialists with complementary skills, losing even single links in knowledge chains could terminate entire production processes. Oral traditions sometimes help preserve technical knowledge, but without regular practical application, crucial details fade rapidly. Absent written documentation, tools that were once common can become complete mysteries within just a few generations, leaving only physical artifacts whose purposes and manufacturing methods remain enigmatic. Accidental rediscovery occasionally occurs through interdisciplinary research. Archaeologists studying ancient pottery might discover microscopic traces of unusual glaze components, prompting chemists to experiment with reproduction methods. Historians examining historical manuscripts might find detailed device illustrations that no longer exist, inspiring experimental reconstruction attempts. Successful reconstruction projects demonstrate that ancient capabilities often exceeded our assumptions. In the context of investigating unknown civilizations, forgotten tools could represent the strongest available physical evidence for their existence. Unlike mythological traditions or astronomical alignments that admit multiple interpretations, physical objects with measurable properties resist easy dismissal. Advanced tools discovered in inappropriate contexts force reconsideration of established timelines when they cannot be manufactured using documented technologies from their supposed periods. The challenge involves proving connections rather than dismissing individual anomalies as imported goods or exceptional craftsmanship accidents. When similar sophisticated tools appear across multiple unconnected sites, cases strengthen for shared knowledge sources. Following patterns observed in architectural evidence, sometimes the most advanced tool examples prove oldest rather than newest, contradicting steady technological progress models while supporting knowledge transmission from already highly skilled groups whose capabilities subsequently diluted or disappeared. Contemplating lost tools inevitably raises questions about entire device and technique categories that never survived long enough for modern discovery. Each archaeological finding reminds us that history encompasses not only accumulated knowledge, but also systematic forgetting of capabilities that once seemed permanent and essential. The ocean represents Earth's largest historical archive, yet one that remains essentially unreadable, despite containing invaluable information about human development and civilization. Covering more than 70% of the planetary surface, most oceanic regions remain unexplored, concealing mountain ranges exceeding Himalayan heights, valleys deeper than continental canyons, and countless locations never witnessed by human observers. Oceanic preservation operates through contradictory mechanisms that simultaneously protect and destroy historical evidence. Certain regions with cold temperatures and minimal oxygen levels slow decay processes dramatically, maintaining shipwrecks and submerged structures intact across centuries or millennia. Other areas with strong currents and storm activity erase all traces within years of submersion. The ocean determines survival patterns according to inconsistent criteria that make comprehensive historical reconstruction extremely difficult. If unknown civilizations existed, particularly those with coastal access, oceanic submersion probably claimed substantial portions of their remains. At the last ice age's conclusion, massive ice sheet melting raised sea levels by more than 100 meters, submerging countless coastal settlements beneath waters that now lie hundreds of meters deep. Coastal locations provide logical sites for early civilizations through advantages including diverse food sources from terrestrial and marine environments, natural trade route access, and defensible geographical positions. When sea levels rose dramatically, many such settlements would have vanished without leaving terrestrial traces, with all buildings, harbors, and artifacts now buried under seafloor sediment layers. Modern sonar technology and remotely operated vehicles have revealed intriguing seafloor features including stone formations resembling constructed walls, patterns that might represent street layouts, and configurations possibly indicating dock or breakwater remains. Divers have occasionally recovered worked stone blocks from depths where no natural formations match their characteristics. However, oceanic archaeological investigation remains slow, expensive, and technically challenging. Detailed seafloor mapping continues in early developmental stages, with most oceanic regions never surveyed at resolutions sufficient for detecting smaller structural remains. Poor visibility conditions in many areas mean that significant features might remain invisible even from short distances. Proving underwater discoveries presents additional complications. Natural geological processes can create formations that superficially resemble artificial construction, while erosion can distort genuine structures beyond easy recognition. Without clear associated artifacts including tools, pottery, or inscriptions, convincing broader scientific communities that underwater features represent human construction remains extremely difficult. Nevertheless, oceanic exploration has yielded significant historical discoveries that demonstrate the potential for much larger findings. Underwater archaeological sites have revealed sophisticated ancient harbors, submerged cities, and technological capabilities that exceed previous assumptions about ancient civilizations. The Oceanic Archive holds potentially transformative information about human development, cultural achievement, and technological capability throughout prehistoric periods. As exploration technologies advance and become more accessible, systematic oceanic archaeology might uncover evidence that fundamentally alters our understanding of ancient human civilization and cultural development. These underwater territories represent one of the largest remaining frontiers for historical discovery, potentially containing evidence for civilizations whose existence we haven't recognized because their remains lie beyond current investigative reach. The ocean's vast unexplored regions might preserve complete settlements, technological artifacts, and cultural evidence that would provide definitive answers to questions about advanced ancient capabilities and global cultural connections. Understanding the ocean as a historical archive requires appreciating both its preservation potential and the technological challenges involved in accessing its contents. The information contained beneath oceanic waters might prove essential for completing our understanding of human achievement and cultural development across the full span of recorded and prehistoric time periods. What if everything we know about human civilization is wrong? What if beneath our oceans lie the ruins of advanced societies that mastered navigation thousands of years before we thought possible? Right now, as you watch this, miles beneath the waves rest shipwrecks so perfectly preserved they look like they sank yesterday, not millennia ago. These vessels carry cargo that's rewriting our understanding of ancient trade networks, revealing connections that span continents in ways that should have been impossible for their time. Deep below our modern coastlines, archaeologists are uncovering harbors and protective sea barriers built thousands of years ago, long before any recorded history mentioned such engineering feats. These aren't simple stone arrangements either. We're talking about sophisticated coastal management systems that required advanced planning and construction techniques. The builders understood tidal patterns, storm surge protection, and harbor design principles that we assumed were modern innovations. But here's where things get truly fascinating. Scattered across ocean floors worldwide are entire drowned landscapes, ironous river valleys, ancient forests, and vast plains that once supported thriving communities. These weren't empty wastelands when the waters rose. Archaeological evidence shows clear signs of human habitation. Stone tools lying in riverbeds, now hundreds of feet underwater, the remains of cooking hearths buried beneath thick layers of marine sediment, and settlement patterns that suggest organized communities. Consider this scenario: an advanced civilization that excelled at maritime exploration and trade. Their coastal cities, shipbuilding centers, and commercial ports would all be submerged today. Even their inland settlements near river mouths could have vanished beneath rising waters, while their vessels might have traveled to distant shores without access to their homeland infrastructure. Detecting the true scope of their influence becomes nearly impossible. The ocean acts as nature's ultimate preservation chamber in ways that continuously surprise scientists. In the Black Sea's oxygen-starved depths, wooden structures remain intact after thousands of years, protected from the bacteria that normally cause decay. Arctic waters have yielded entire vessels with masts still upright and rigging systems perfectly preserved, as if their crews had just stepped away. Should we discover such a site belonging to an unidentified culture, it could fundamentally alter our timeline of human technological development. Yet the sea guard's more than just physical artifacts. It maintains invisible records through current patterns, fish migration corridors, and seasonal wind systems that ancient navigators learned to exploit. These natural highways would have guided early seafarers across vast distances, and their traces remain embedded in the ocean's behavior today. In certain regions, researchers can track potential ancient travel routes by following the distribution of goods, materials, or even plant species that appear far from their natural habitats. Some scholars propose that legends of sunken lands found in various mythologies might actually preserve folk memories of these drowned coastlines. When entire communities watch their homes disappear beneath advancing waters, such traumatic events become seared into collective memory, passed down through generations as stories long after the specific details fade into metaphor. Modern technology is revolutionizing our ability to explore these underwater realms. Autonomous submersible vehicles now create detailed three-dimensional maps of seafloor terrain, while breakthrough imaging systems can penetrate murky waters to reveal hidden structures beneath. Every new survey mission carries the potential to uncover evidence that challenges our fundamental assumptions about human development and capability. However, for each discovery we make, thousands of potential sites remain unexplored. The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet's surface, and we've examined less than 5% of it thoroughly. If an unknown civilization did flourish along ancient coastlines, and statistical probability suggests this is likely minor, the majority of their legacy lies in regions we haven't even begun to investigate. The deep waters continue serving as humanity's greatest archive, safeguarding evidence of lives lived, journeys undertaken, and cultures that may have existed completely outside our current historical framework. Every artifact recovered from these depths forces us to reconsider not just what we know about the past, but what we've assumed was possible for ancient peoples to achieve. These discoveries raise profound questions about human capability and technological development. If sophisticated seafaring cultures existed earlier than we believed, what other assumptions about ancient limitations might be incorrect? The evidence emerging from our oceans suggests that human ingenuity and exploration drive may have manifested far earlier and more extensively than traditional archaeology indicates. The preservation conditions found in certain underwater environments create time capsules that offer unparalleled glimpses into ancient life. Unlike terrestrial sites where organic materials decompose and metal objects corrode, Specific oceanic conditions can maintain artifacts in pristine condition for millennia. This means that when we do locate significant underwater archaeological sites, the quality and completeness of evidence often surpasses anything found on land. As exploration technology advances and deep-sea archaeology becomes more sophisticated, we stand on the threshold of potentially revolutionary discoveries. The next major find could emerge from any number of promising locations worldwide, each holding the possibility of revealing civilizations whose achievements exceeded what we thought possible for their era. The ocean depths remain humanity's greatest unexplored frontier, holding secrets that could fundamentally reshape our understanding of our own species' journey through time. Developing such astronomical precision demands far more than casual stargazing mix. It requires sophisticated mathematical understanding that would challenge even modern observers. When we discover ancient structures perfectly aligned with celestial events occurring thousands of years ago, we're witnessing evidence of knowledge systems that spanned multiple generations and potentially entire civilizations. If a lost culture possessed advanced astronomical expertise, their influence might surface in unexpected locations. Consider finding buildings oriented toward both local seasonal markers and distant stellar phenomena. This dual alignment suggests contact with groups possessing comprehensive celestial knowledge extending far beyond regional observations. When widely separated cultures display remarkably similar star tracking methods, it hints at shared origins or extensive knowledge exchange networks. Interpreting these astronomical alignments presents significant challenges. Centuries of erosion gradually alter landscape features, while natural disasters and human reconstruction efforts can shift structural orientations from their original positions. Ground movement from earthquakes or settling can throw off precise alignments that once pointed accurately towards specific celestial targets. Sometimes apparent intentional alignments result from pure coincidence rather than deliberate planning. However, when multiple site features consistently point toward identical astronomical phenomena, dismissing them as accidental becomes increasingly difficult. The probability of random chance creating such patterns drops dramatically when several independent elements within a location all reference the same celestial events or cycles. Astronomical knowledge leaves distinctive fingerprints in artwork and material culture. Ancient carvings depicting specific star configurations, symbols representing planetary movement cycles, and artistic renderings of eclipse events can be cross-referenced with known celestial occurrences. When artistic depictions match astronomical events that occurred millennia before the artifact's creation, it suggests information transmission across vast time periods through carefully maintained oral traditions or unknown recording systems. The precision level found in some ancient astronomical artwork indicates direct observation rather than speculation or mythology. Solar eclipse carvings, for instance, can be matched to exact dates and geographic locations where such events would have been visible. When these dates precede the established timeline of the culture creating the artwork by centuries or millennia, it raises fundamental questions about knowledge sources and transmission methods. Long-distance coordination represents another fascinating application of astronomical knowledge. Separated groups tracking identical celestial events could synchronize activities without direct communication networks. Shared star-based calendars enabled coordinated trade expeditions, seasonal migrations, or ceremonial gatherings across enormous geographic areas. This system provided reliable scheduling mechanisms that transcended language barriers and political boundaries. Unlike other knowledge preservation methods, astronomical observation systems possess unique durability advantages. Written records decay on organic materials, wooden artifacts decompose, and stone inscriptions erode over time. Celestial patterns, however, change slowly enough that skilled modern observers can reconstruct much of what ancient astronomers witnessed, creating one of humanity's few consistent reference points across all historical periods. The sky served as both practical instrument and cultural foundation for societies dependent on precise timing and navigation. Agricultural communities needed accurate seasonal predictions for planting and harvesting cycles. Maritime cultures required reliable directional guidance for ocean voyages. Religious organizations used celestial events to schedule ceremonies and festivals. All these applications demanded sophisticated observation skills and mathematical calculation abilities. For an unknown civilization, astronomical expertise could have functioned as both survival tool and unifying cultural element. Standardized celestial knowledge systems enable time organization, world navigation, and information transmission across generations and vast distances. Such capabilities would have provided significant advantages in trade, exploration, and territorial expansion. The mathematical complexity underlying ancient astronomical achievements often exceeds what we expect from supposedly primitive cultures. Calculating planetary positions requires tracking objects that appear to reverse direction against stellar backgrounds, a phenomenon demanding years of careful record-keeping and mathematical analysis. Predicting eclipse timing and duration involves understanding complex orbital mechanics that weren't supposedly developed until much later historical periods. Some astronomical alignments demonstrate awareness of precession Becher, the gradual shift in Earth's axial orientation that causes stellar positions to change over roughly 26,000 year cycles. Structures aligned with stars as they appeared thousands of years ago indicate either multi-generational knowledge preservation projects or inheritance from predecessors with established astronomical traditions. These discovery patterns suggest that human astronomical capabilities may have developed much earlier than conventional timelines indicate. Rather than gradual knowledge accumulation over centuries, we might be seeing evidence of sophisticated understanding that was developed, lost, and rediscovered multiple times throughout human history. Each new archaeological site with precise celestial alignments adds weight to the possibility that our ancestors possessed far more advanced scientific capabilities than we've previously recognized. Environmental transformations continuously reshape the Earth's surface, erasing evidence of ancient pathways that once connected distant civilizations. Desert expansion swallows fertile corridors where caravans traveled for centuries. Dense forests reclaim cleared passages, hiding roads beneath layers of vegetation and soil. Shifting river channels abandon their former courses, leaving once vital waterways as dry valleys with no hint of their historical importance. Transportation networks that directly linked major population centers can vanish entirely from visible landscapes within just a few generations of abandonment. Contemporary technological advances are revolutionizing our ability to rediscover these vanished connections. Satellite imaging systems can detect subtle variations in soil composition and vegetation patterns that reveal the ghostly outlines of ancient pathways invisible to ground-level observation. Chemical composition analysis of archaeological artifacts can determine their geographical origins with remarkable accuracy, sometimes pinpointing specific quarries or workshops thousands of miles away. When researchers find materials from identical sources distributed along linear patterns stretching across continents, it strongly indicates organized transportation corridors operating far earlier than conventional historical timelines suggest. These distribution patterns often predate established trade networks by centuries or millennia, challenging our assumptions about ancient technological capabilities and geographic knowledge. For a vanished civilization, commerce networks could have served as both survival mechanism and enduring influence. By establishing connections between distant regions, they would have facilitated not just material exchange, but also cultural transmission, technological diffusion, and intellectual cross-pollination. Even after their societies collapse, the reverberations of their commercial systems might persist through the widespread distribution of goods, ideas, and innovations they introduced. The ephemeral nature of transportation routes creates unique archaeological challenges. While researchers can uncover remnants of buildings, vessels, or tools, pathways themselves are essentially empty spaces that leave minimal physical evidence. Without continuous maintenance and usage, roads fade rapidly, leaving only transported goods as testimony to their former existence. These materials often change hands repeatedly over time, creating complex distribution patterns that obscure their original movement trajectories. Despite these difficulties, certain artifacts communicate their stories clearly enough to discern larger patterns. When specific materials appear consistently in locations where they logically shouldn't exist, when identical manufacturing techniques emerge across geographically isolated regions, and when traditional narratives hint at distant contacts, the outline of extensive networks begins to emerge. Within these fragmentary traces, we might glimpse the faint architecture of systems belonging to forgotten peoples. Plant species provide particularly compelling evidence of human movement and cultural exchange. Seeds attach themselves to clothing, hide within bundles of traded merchandise, or travel in the digestive systems of livestock transported for food. Whether people migrate across valleys or oceans, the vegetation they value typically accompanies them. Over extended periods, this creates botanical trails, living maps composed not of stone or parchment, but of roots, stems, and fruits that document human journeys across landscapes. Archaeologists and botanists collaborate to decode these vegetative pathways, tracking human migrations through crop distributions. When domesticated plants appear far from their native habitats, it typically indicates intentional introduction by traveling peoples. Archaeological records sometimes reveal precisely when specific species first appeared in new regions. While these appearances occasionally align with documented migration or trade patterns, many instances occur much earlier than expected, in locations where no clear transportation mechanism explains their presence. These represent botanical equivalents of displaced artifacts, evidence that may seem less dramatic than elaborate tools or monumental architecture, but proves equally revelatory about ancient connections. The unexpected distribution of certain plant varieties hints at contact networks absent from any other historical records. Corn exemplifies this phenomenon perfectly. Indigenous to the Americas, maize served as a cornerstone crop for centuries before European arrival. Yet controversial claims exist of corn residues in ancient archaeological sites across regions where no transoceanic contact supposedly occurred. Should such evidence prove valid, it would demonstrate exchange networks spanning vast distances much earlier than currently accepted timelines allow. Other vegetation tells subtler stories of ancient connections. Cotton varieties in widely separated global regions share genetic characteristics, suggesting common ancestry, despite their locations showing no documented historical contact. Sweet potatoes, native to South America, have been discovered in pre-contact Polynesian sites, implying either intentional or accidental Pacific transportation long before European vessels achieved such voyages. Sometimes the significant factor isn't the plant itself, but rather the cultivation knowledge accompanying it. Certain crops demand precise planting schedules, specific soil preparation techniques, or complex processing methods before becoming edible. When cultures with no previous experience successfully grow such demanding plants, it strongly suggests expert instruction from knowledgeable outsiders. For a lost civilization, seeds could represent their most persistent legacy. Maritime peoples might have transported plant varieties across hemispheres, deliberately introducing them to suitable new environments. Even if their settlements didn't survive historical upheavals, the introduced vegetation might remain as the sole evidence of their presence. Botanical evidence also illuminates ancient climatic conditions. When plants appear in archaeological layers from periods when local weather patterns wouldn't have supported their growth, it indicates either long-distance trade connections or environmental fluctuations not previously recognized. Both possibilities can fundamentally alter our understanding of historical settlement patterns and survival strategies. The preservation challenges surrounding plant evidence are significant. Seeds, pollen, and vegetative fibers decompose more rapidly than stone or metal artifacts. However, under optimal conditions, marsh dry caves, frozen ground, or waterlogged soils, organic materials can survive for millennia. Even when original plant matter disappears completely, chemical signatures may persist in surrounding soil, pottery vessels, or human dental remains. Genetic analysis has revolutionized botanical archaeology by enabling scientists to reconstruct evolutionary and migration histories of both modern and ancient plant varieties. When genetic trails take unexpected turns, with species appearing suddenly in distant locations without intermediate developmental steps, it suggests human-mediated transportation across considerable distances much earlier than anticipated. These genetic patterns sometimes reveal that plants in one region share closer relationships with distant varieties than with neighboring species. Such relationships indicate direct contact rather than gradual geographic spread through intermediate populations. Plants also carry profound cultural significance beyond their practical applications. Certain crops become associated with religious rituals, ceremonial practices, or trade value systems. When prestige plants appear in archaeological contexts, they often indicate the arrival of new ideological frameworks alongside agricultural innovations. Each botanical discovery in an unexpected location represents the invisible fingerprint of human movement across landscapes and time. When seeds appear where nature never intended them, We're witnessing echoes of journeys, connections, and relationships that conventional history has failed to document. For civilizations that operated discreetly without constructing massive stone monuments or sprawling urban centers, the vegetation they transported might constitute their most enduring and visible legacy. Seeds possess remarkable survival capabilities that often outlast human memory itself. They can remain dormant for decades before sprouting, then reproduce generation after generation, carrying within their genetic code the story of the hands that first planted them in foreign soil. Unlike fragile artifacts or crumbling structures, living plants continue their existence across centuries, serving as biological archives of ancient human activity. When examining the emergence of recognized civilizations, historians typically focus on their independent achievements, monumental architecture, written languages, governmental systems, artistic traditions, and technological innovations. Each accomplishment gets attributed to that culture's unique ingenuity, shaped by local environmental conditions, available resources, and specific historical circumstances. However, this perspective assumes these societies developed in complete isolation from external influences. What if major civilizations weren't entirely self-contained entities? What if their developmental trajectories were influenced, accelerated, or fundamentally altered by contact with groups we no longer remember? Traditional historical narratives present early states as emerging independently across different regions: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, and the Americas. Each apparently developed agriculture, urban planning, and administrative systems through internal innovation. The architectural differences, distinct writing systems, and varied cultural practices among these civilizations suggest organic growth from unique local contexts. Yet certain similarities demand explanation. The solar app, the remarkably rapid transition from simple agricultural villages to sophisticated urban centers, the sudden appearance of large-scale construction projects requiring advanced engineering knowledge, the early mastery of complex technologies, and the surprising speed with which innovation spread across vast distances. Consider a scenario where an advanced civilization, already possessing sophisticated knowledge in agriculture, metallurgy, navigation, and governance, made contact with less technologically developed societies. Such encounters wouldn't require conquest or replacement of local populations. Simply sharing ideas, techniques, and knowledge could fundamentally alter developmental trajectories for centuries to come. The earliest phases of known civilizations often present the most perplexing archaeological puzzles. Mesopotamian cities emerged with sophisticated irrigation networks and administrative tools already functioning at advanced levels. Egyptian monumental stone architecture appeared during the Old Kingdom with construction techniques that seemed perfected from their first implementation. In the Andes, massive ceremonial complexes were built before widespread agricultural development in certain regions. While these technological leaps might result from internal innovation, they equally fit patterns suggesting influence from external sources. Contact doesn't necessarily require direct instruction. Mind-trade relationships can transmit not just materials but comprehensive knowledge of their applications. Exposure to new concepts or technologies can inspire local adaptations that generate entirely novel developments. Single encounters might trigger changes that reverberate through societies for generations. Archaeological evidence makes influence difficult to prove definitively. Cultural traits can develop independently when societies face similar environmental challenges, leading to convergent solutions without any contact between groups. However, when multiple elements mediate technologies, architectural styles, symbolic systems simultaneously in distant locations, the possibility of shared influence becomes increasingly compelling. Genetic evidence might provide additional clues about such ancient connections. If populations in early urban centers show admixture signatures from distant groups, it could indicate migrations or visitors who brought specialized skills along with their genes. However, proving the source and nature of those transmitted skills remains challenging even with genetic data. Oral traditions sometimes preserve fragments of these ancient encounters. Stories describing strangers arriving with unusual tools, bringing agricultural or construction knowledge, or teaching new methods for tracking time, appear across many cultures worldwide. These visitors are often portrayed in mythological terms as culture heroes or divine beings. Over time, historical details become obscured, and the original human actors transform into legendary figures. If an unknown civilization influenced the development of others, their contributions might be hiding in plain sight throughout our historical record. The agricultural foundations supporting major empires, urban planning principles, stoneworking techniques, and metallurgical processes could all represent borrowed knowledge. Once integrated into daily life, such innovations become indistinguishable from homegrown developments, absorbed completely into local cultural systems. The disappearance of original knowledge sources could occur rapidly through various mechanisms. Mobile or coastal peoples might see their settlements erased by environmental changes, like sea level rise or climate shifts. If they existed in small numbers compared to the populations they influenced, their distinct identity could dissolve within a few generations of intermarriage and cultural mixing. Their legacy would survive in others' achievements, but their names and stories would vanish entirely. This raises profound questions about the nature of independent achievement in human history. If fundamental ideas, techniques, and social structures were seeded from external sources, then our understanding of early civilizations might represent a tapestry woven from threads originating far beyond the regions we've studied intensively. Some researchers point to the clustering of early monumental architecture around similar latitudes as potential evidence of coordinated knowledge transmission. Others note how certain mathematical systems, mythological themes, and symbolic patterns appear across continents with no known contact mechanisms. While these patterns could represent coincidence or convergent development, they might also constitute residual evidence of widespread but now invisible influence networks. The concept of a guiding or contributing civilization doesn't diminish the accomplishments of cultures we recognize. Instead, it highlights their remarkable adaptability and ability to integrate new tools and concepts into uniquely local applications. Influence differs fundamentally from dependence most, even with external input. How cultures absorb and develop that knowledge reflects their own needs, values, and creative capabilities. Furthermore, identical influences could produce dramatically different outcomes in various locations. One society might apply new techniques to irrigation system construction, while another focuses on fortification building. Navigation methods might be adapted for river transport in one region and ocean crossing in another. The knowledge source remains constant, but applications vary according to local conditions and priorities. If this theoretical framework proves accurate, significant portions of our shared heritage may be far older than currently recognized, passed through countless hands before reaching the civilizations that eventually recorded them. The original knowledge bearers may have vanished completely, but traces of their understanding continue shaping our world through the achievements of their cultural inheritors. When discussing vanished civilizations, historians typically possess some understanding of their disappearance: mass warfare, invasions, droughts, economic collapse, shifting trade routes, or epidemics. Archaeological evidence usually provides enough information to reconstruct general sequences of events, even when specific details remain uncertain about the final chapters of these lost societies. With an unknown civilizations, one absent from historical records and detectable only through indirect evidence, the mystery deepens considerably. Why would they disappear so completely? How could a group sophisticated enough to influence multiple cultures across vast distances leave behind so few obvious traces? If we envision a society advanced enough to shape other civilizations, they must have possessed remarkable organization, abundant resources, and exceptional adaptability. These very qualities make sudden, total disappearance seem unlikely unless they face truly overwhelming circumstances. Environmental transformation presents one compelling explanation for their vanishing. The conclusion of the last ice age fundamentally reshaped global geography, submerging enormous land masses beneath rising oceans and dramatically altering climate patterns worldwide. If this civilization maintained primarily coastal settlements, advancing waters could have consumed most of their inhabited areas within relatively few generations. Such flooding wouldn't necessarily eliminate entire populations immediately. Survivors could relocate to higher ground or inland territories, but this displacement might sever their connections to essential resources and establish trade networks that sustain their sophisticated way of life. Over successive generations, these refugees could gradually integrate with existing inland populations, watching their distinctive cultural identity fade until only scattered fragments persisted in local traditions. Catastrophic natural disasters offer another plausible scenario for rapid civilizational collapse. Massive volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, or devastating earthquakes can obliterate entire regions within hours or days. Historical records document events like the 1815 Tambora eruption causing global temperature reductions and widespread agricultural failures. If similar or larger catastrophes occurred millennia ago, they could have pushed even well-established cultures beyond their survival thresholds. Epidemic disease represents another devastating possibility. Novel pathogens introduced through contact with distant populations could spread rapidly throughout interconnected communities, particularly those linked by extensive trade networks. Without natural immunity or effective medical treatments, the consequences could prove catastrophic. Such events might not only drastically reduce population numbers, but also disrupt the complex systems necessary for maintaining infrastructure and transmitting specialized knowledge across generations. Warfare remains difficult to assess without written records, yet conflict has historically caused numerous civilizational collapses. Competition for scarce resources, territorial expansion ambitions, or fundamental cultural differences can trigger prolonged conflicts. If the unknown civilization maintained relatively small numbers despite technological advantages, they might have remained vulnerable to larger, less sophisticated groups capable of overwhelming them through sheer persistence and numerical superiority. Internal decay presents another sobering possibility. Technological prowess doesn't guarantee social stability or political cohesion. Leadership disputes, economic inequality, corruption, or erosion of public trust can weaken even the most capable societies from within. In such cases, collapse might not result from dramatic external events, but from gradual internal deterioration of unity and shared purpose. There's also the intriguing possibility that they didn't truly vanish in the conventional sense of complete disappearance. Instead, they may have been gradually absorbed into the cultures they once influenced or guided. Over extended periods, their distinct identity could dissolve into larger population groups, leaving only subtle differences in linguistic patterns, traditional practices, or technological approaches as evidence of their former existence. Archaeological gaps can make disappearances appear more complete than reality warrants. If most settlements utilize materials that decompose rapidly, miters, wood, organic textiles, perishable binding agents, or were located in areas prone to erosion, geological activity, or other destructive processes, virtually nothing might survive for modern discovery. Organic materials rot, metals corrode, fabrics disintegrate, and even stone can weather away under appropriate conditions. Without monumental architecture or durable inscriptions, entire cultures can vanish almost completely from physical records. Political erasure represents another historically documented phenomenon. If they engaged in conflicts with groups that subsequently dominated their territories, victorious societies might have intentionally destroyed records, monuments, and symbols of defeated cultures. This pattern has repeated throughout history, with conquerors rewriting narratives to emphasize their own achievements, while minimizing or completely erasing evidence of rivals and predecessors. If the unknown civilization operated across extensive territories through relatively small, scattered settlements, their disappearance might not have been sudden or dramatic. Instead, it could have been a gradual fading process, with individual communities facing unique challenges until none retained connection to the original collective identity. Each settlement might have adapted to local conditions independently, eventually losing touch with their shared heritage. The most challenging scenario to recognize involves voluntary abandonment of their established way of life. If environmental changes, resource depletion, or other pressures made their traditional systems impractical or unsustainable, they might have deliberately shifted to simpler living arrangements, dispersing into smaller groups that blended seamlessly into surrounding populations. In such cases, their disappearance wouldn't represent collapse so much as conscious transformation. What makes their vanishing particularly fascinating is that if they did influence known civilizations, then essential aspects of their legacy continue existing. Their innovations, methodologies, and even genetic contributions could be intricately woven throughout the cultures that followed. Though their name may be forgotten and monuments lost, their impact might be embedded within the fundamental foundations of later societies. Their disappearance wouldn't mean their story truly ended, we might simply be reading later chapters without access to the prologue. When discussing vanished civilizations, we naturally envision them as entirely gone miced or populations scattered or absorbed, cultures dissolved into historical background. However, disappearance in historical terms doesn't necessarily mean physical extinction. Groups can cease being recognized as distinct civilizations while continuing to exist in modified forms. This possibility raises intriguing questions. Could the unknown civilization we've been considering still exist today, hidden in plain sight? If they maintained coastal or island-based settlements, survivors of whatever ended their prominence could have retreated to remote areas, deliberately avoiding large-scale contact with the broader world. Intentional isolation isn't unprecedented. Even in our modern era, communities exist that live separately from mainstream society, maintaining traditions and languages that differ markedly from surrounding nations. Some groups remain known to outsiders but preserve cultural separation through choice. Over centuries, such societies could adapt to changing circumstances while preserving core elements of their heritage. To outsiders, they might appear as unremarkable small cultural groups, but within their communities, oral histories and traditional practices could maintain vivid memories of times when they wielded far greater influence. If their knowledge base emphasized practical skills rather than monumental achievements, focusing on navigation, agriculture, or specialized crafts, adaptation would be easier without leaving obvious physical traces. Practical skills transfer readily to new environments without drawing attention. Methods for celestial navigation or agricultural optimization don't require massive structures or permanent inscriptions to survive and remain useful. There's also the possibility of partial survival through selective integration. Rather than maintaining strict isolation, they might have merged strategically with other societies, retaining only specific fragments of their language, belief systems, or technical knowledge, while adopting new cultural elements that enhance their survival prospects. Such gradual integration could preserve essential knowledge while allowing surface adaptation to changing political and social environments. Their descendants might practice traditional techniques without fully understanding their historical significance, carrying forward ancestral wisdom through habit and custom, rather than conscious preservation of ancient heritage. Over extended periods, these cultural fragments could integrate so seamlessly that they appear as indigenous local traditions with no apparent connection to any broader historical context. However, for observers possessing appropriate knowledge and analytical skills, subtle indicators might remain detectable. Distinctive architectural elements, repetitive artistic motifs, unconventional agricultural techniques, or navigation methods that differ markedly from surrounding cultures could all suggest deeper historical origins, extending far beyond immediate regional development. Oral tradition represents a crucial repository of preserved knowledge. Numerous cultures maintain origin narratives that locate their ancestors in distant territories or describe migrations from lands that no longer exist above sea level. While scholars often interpret such stories symbolically or mythologically, some could be rooted in actual historical events. When communities preserve remarkably specific knowledge about remote geographical locations, seasonal environmental patterns, or complex astronomical cycles, it might indicate inherited collective memory spanning many generations. If an unknown civilization did persist in modified forms, it could explain various historical anomalies, instances where sophisticated techniques or revolutionary concepts appear suddenly in regions without clear local developmental precursors. Small surviving groups could function as discrete knowledge transmitters, sharing just enough information to catalyze new innovations without revealing the complete scope of their ancestral achievements. Identifying such communities today presents enormous challenges compounded by temporal distance. Across thousands of years, languages undergo dramatic transformations, customs evolve substantially, and even fundamental identity markers can shift beyond recognition. Without written documentation or compelling reasons to preserve specific narratives, essential details inevitably fade from collective memory. Populations might recognize their distinctiveness from neighboring groups without retaining clear understanding of historical reasons or developmental processes. Modern anthropological and genetic research provide some detection tools for such investigations. Unusual genetic markers within populations that otherwise match their neighbors could suggest separate, more ancient origins. Distinct linguistic structures or vocabulary elements lacking clear local etymological roots can also hint at long-term cultural survival from different source populations. However, even with these sophisticated analytical methods, evidence often remains ambiguous, and interpretation depends heavily on contextual understanding. There's also the critical question of whether such groups would welcome discovery. Historical records document countless examples where contact with larger, more technologically advanced societies brought disruption, displacement, or complete destruction to smaller communities. For peoples who have survived through remaining unnoticed by mainstream civilization, revealing themselves could represent an unacceptable risk. Their choice to maintain invisibility might be entirely deliberate and a survival strategy developed through harsh historical experience. Another fascinating possibility involves legacy preservation without direct cultural continuity. Perhaps no immediate descendants remain, but certain isolated enclaves or traditional practices still carry forward elements of their worldview and knowledge systems. This could manifest as navigation methodologies embedded in specialized seafaring communities, or particular astronomical observation techniques that survive in scattered coastal populations. In such scenarios, the original civilization has vanished, but functional components remain active, woven into other cultures without proper attribution or recognition. Remnants of this civilization might have survived in forms we wouldn't immediately recognize as connected to advanced ancient societies. Our contemporary world contains numerous communities whose lifestyles are precisely adapted to specific environmental niches, mountain regions, desert territories, rainforest areas, and ways suggesting profound historical continuity, extending far beyond currently accepted timelines for human settlement in those locations. Cultural survival doesn't require maintaining identical forms across millennia. Societies evolve continuously in response to changing circumstances. If the unknown civilization did persist, it would likely appear dramatically different today, shaped by centuries of necessary adaptation and selective integration with neighboring groups. The tools, materials, and social structures they employ currently might bear little resemblance to those from their peak influence period. However, the underlying foundations, core identity markers, and specialized knowledge could remain intact for those trained to recognize such continuity. If they do still exist, these communities might be fully aware of external academic interest in their historical background. They could possess far more comprehensive understanding about the ancient connections we've been theorizing than our research has uncovered, but choose not to share such information. From their perspective, revealing complete historical narratives might not justify potential negative consequences that could follow such disclosure. The possibility of their continued existence doesn't require hidden cities on remote islands or completely isolated settlements. It only demands that some essential aspects, people, knowledge systems, cultural traditions, continued in modified forms without being totally absorbed by surrounding populations. They could be living integrated lives alongside everyone else, their extraordinary history unrecognized, their historical influence hidden within routine details of contemporary daily existence. When considering civilizational legacy, we typically envision obvious markers, towering architectural ruins, stone inscriptions, artifacts preserved in museum collections. These dramatic elements capture attention and survive across centuries. However, cultural influence doesn't require monumental expression to create lasting impact. Sometimes the most profound legacies exist in quiet details embedded within our living patterns and thought processes, carrying forward ancient presence long after original names have been completely forgotten. If an unknown civilization once guided development of cultures we recognize, much of their contribution might not stand out as foreign innovation. Instead, it would have blended seamlessly into everyday practices, tools, and behavioral patterns that subsequent generations accepted without question. Agricultural storage techniques that became regional standards, construction methods so practical they were never reconsidered, navigation approaches that became common maritime knowledge without anyone remembering their origins. We exist surrounded by such inheritances, most invisible to us because they've accompanied human development for so long. The furniture we use, security mechanisms we install, urban planning principles governing our cities, all possess deep roots in decisions made generations before our lifetimes. Some trace to cultures we know well, while others could originate from peoples we've never identified or acknowledged. Cultural influence doesn't require massive populations. Small groups possessing specialized knowledge can generate disproportionate effects on much larger societies. Once their innovations are adopted, they can spread independently, evolving and adapting as they move across regions and time periods. The original source fades into historical background while the knowledge becomes part of shared human capability. If a forgotten civilization transmitted agricultural methodologies, introduced specific crops, or developed techniques for environmental management, those contributions could still be sustaining populations today without any recognition of their historical sources. If they influenced early measurement systems, commercial practices, or governmental structures, traces might remain embedded within contemporary institutional operations. Languages preserve these footprints through isolated vocabulary, place names, or grammatical structures that don't match surrounding linguistic families. Such anomalies can indicate older cultural influences that preceded currently recognized settlement patterns. Even personal and family naming conventions might carry forward ancient traditions whose origins have been lost to conscious memory but persist through habit and custom. The most profound realization is that we may be living daily with the legacy of this unknown civilization, using their innovations, following their methodologies, and benefiting from their accumulated wisdom without any awareness of our debt to their forgotten contributions to human development. Even when original languages disappear entirely, linguistic fragments can survive within everyday conversation, unnoticed by speakers who use them naturally. These remnant words and phrases become so thoroughly integrated into common usage that their foreign origins remain completely invisible to contemporary users. Belief systems and narrative traditions represent another domain where profound historical continuity can persist across millennia. Myths that appear purely symbolic or fantastical might actually contain encoded knowledge about stellar movements, oceanic behavior patterns, or weather cycles. When these stories survive across multiple cultures with only minor variations, it suggests transmission by a shared original source, repeated countless times until their practical meanings faded, but the essential narratives endured through cultural memory. Artistic expression and design elements can preserve ancient influence through visual continuity. Specific patterns, mathematical proportions, or decorative motifs can persist for centuries, transmitted from master craftspeople to apprentices without anyone recognizing their deeper historical significance. Decorative elements that once held symbolic or functional importance might continue appearing simply because they're perceived as aesthetically pleasing or traditionally appropriate, long after their original meanings have been completely forgotten. Even technological innovations can become so universally standard that nobody questions their developmental origins. Particular methods for joining materials, tool configurations, or measurement marking systems can survive through countless generations of refinement and adaptation. These practical elements become so fundamental to human activity that their sources vanish into the background of assumed knowledge. If the unknown civilization truly maintained extensive global connections, their influence could be distributed so widely across human culture that recognizing the overall pattern becomes nearly impossible. It would resemble trying to identify a single voice within a crowded environment where everyone has learned to speak using similar intonation and vocabulary. The individual contributions blend seamlessly into collective human expression. This widespread distribution raises the intriguing possibility that we've already discovered fragments of their civilization, but have misclassified them as belonging entirely to other known cultures. An artifact housed in one institution, a story fragment preserved in another collection, a crop variety whose genetic origins don't match its current geographic distribution. Each piece appears perfectly logical in isolation, but together they might reveal a much larger historical narrative. Contemporary scientific advancement is beginning to connect these scattered elements more effectively. Breakthrough developments in genetic analysis, linguistic reconstruction, and archaeological methodology enable researchers to trace the lineages of plants, animals, and conceptual frameworks with unprecedented precision. As these analytical fields continue developing, they may unveil influence patterns pointing toward a civilization not yet recognized within our established historical framework. However, even without discovering definitive physical proof, the concept of subtle cultural footprints carries profound significance. It reminds us that history isn't exclusively recorded in durable stone monuments and metal artifacts. Historical influence is also preserved in our behavioral patterns, fundamental assumptions, and invisible connections linking contemporary daily existence to peoples who lived thousands of years before our time. The unknown civilization, should it have existed, might not have left behind a single identifiable structure we can definitively point toward as evidence. Yet if they fundamentally shaped human developmental trajectories in ways that continue affecting modern life, then in essential terms, they remain present among us, not as a hidden city or lost population awaiting discovery, but as integral components of the foundational framework underlying the world we currently inhabit. Their legacy would exist not in dramatic ruins or treasure hoards, but in the countless small decisions that feel natural to us, the way we organize our communities, approach problem solving, or understand our relationship with natural cycles. Every time we use a technique that works so well, we never question its origins. We might be honoring their memory without realizing it. This perspective transforms our understanding of cultural inheritance. Rather than viewing civilizations as discrete, independent entities, we begin recognizing humanity's shared developmental story, one where knowledge, wisdom, and innovation flow between peoples across vast distances and time periods, creating an interconnected tapestry of human achievement that transcends individual cultural boundaries. The search for this unknown civilization ultimately becomes a search for understanding ourselves and the remarkable journey that brought us to our current capabilities. Whether they existed as a single unified society or represented a network of connected communities, their theoretical presence reminds us that human ingenuity and curiosity have been shaping our world for far longer than we might imagine. Thank you for joining me on this exploration through the hidden corridors of human history. The mysteries we've examined together represent just the beginning of countless questions waiting to be asked and investigated. Each new discovery in archaeology, genetics, and historical research brings us closer to understanding the complete story of human development, including the chapters that may have been written by peoples whose names we've forgotten, but whose influence continues shaping our lives today. Keep questioning the accepted narratives, remain curious about the stories that haven't been told yet, and remember that the greatest discoveries often hide in plain sight, waiting for someone with the right perspective to recognize their true significance.